the strongest support of the Fourth Hokage. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 203, The Fourth Generation. Health supplements, maternity wear, babysitters, prenatal products, formula, children's clothing. The two, who should have been preoccupied with village affairs, swept through Konoha's markets in record time. Minato and Shino, never short of cash, snatched up nearly everything they could possibly need. With a sealing scroll, there was no need to worry about getting it. The two grown men briefly took on the role of house husband, arranging everything. Even though the two expectant mothers hadn't experienced any pregnancy symptoms yet and everything was normal, they were ordered to drop all work and rest at home. Perhaps, if it weren't for the Yondame's inauguration ceremony tomorrow, Minato and Shinai would have been stuck in this blissful trance for a long, long time. The night was ablaze with stars. After a busy day of helping the two expectant mothers to bed, they returned to the hustle and bustle of preparing for the upcoming ceremony. By the time they finished their work, the beautiful stars had already filled the night sky. No matter who they are, this road of growth is full of thorns and dangers. After going through countless life and death situations, they can finally sit on the empty rooftop again, just like when they were children, quietly admiring the moonlight. Raising his wine glass, Jinyoung drank the contents in a gulp. He suddenly laughed happily, just as unrestrained as he was in his childhood. He stood up, humming a tune that was completely out of tune, and danced unsteadily. Those clumsy movements made him look like the most unprofessional clown, but he was so happy. And beside him, Minato drank quietly by himself, just like when he was a child, smiling as he watched him jump for joy, feel sad, dance wildly, and become silent. There is always a limit to the responsibilities, pressures, or secrets that a person can bear, and a man like Jinyoung, who has been carrying all the truths of this world from the beginning, is of course no exception. They are both familiar with such scenes. The man who, from a very young age, seemed more like an adult than a child, also had his own fragile, childish side. Of course, he wouldn't show this weakness to anyone except his best friend, except for Minato Namikaze. Aha! Minato, starting tomorrow, you're the Fourth Hokage. Shino drunkenly patted Minato's shoulder, who in turn flashed a bright smile. Hey! From now on, if anything happens, Hokage-sama must stand by me. Those advisors are a bunch of idiots, each one so timid and indecisive. Well, they probably have their own reasons. What? Don't worry, I'll definitely help you from now on, I know, huh? If you don't talk about that, I'm lost. You must shine tomorrow. After all, you're the youngest Hokage. It seemed he drunk too much. Shinai slipped and nearly fell, but he didn't panic at all. A strong arm caught him before he fell. Be careful, he. Thanks. They sat back to back, just like the night before their wedding. Time flew by, and the older they grew, the fewer times the two brothers could enjoy a drink like this, but the bond between them grew stronger. Minato, what's wrong? Shinai stretched out his right hand, reaching out towards the bright moon. It was as if, with a single grip, he held the entire world in his grasp. Only a few fragments of moonlight remained. If anything happens, promise me you'll take good care of Usagi. No. Minato refused without hesitation. No one can take better care of Usagi. His voice was unwavering. Because I also believe that nothing in this world can phase the Senju Shinayu I know. Shinayu didn't say anything else. Instead, just like that night, he silently extended his arm to hold the wine glass. Almost at the same time, Minato, who was about to become the Fourth Hokage, did the same. The two wine glasses gently clinked together. No more words were needed. Just believe, that's enough. The dividing line of the inauguration ceremony, the morning sun tears through the eternal darkness of the night. That beam of golden light, from this morning on, will continue to illuminate the people of Konoha. Yes. Whether merchants or laborers, whether commoners or ninjas, whether nobles or commoners, on this day, they all came to Konoha's assembly square. Beneath Yan, the symbol of Konoha's highest glory, from today on, they will witness the change of an era. From this day on, Konoha will belong to the fourth generation. the fourth generation Minato Namikaze. When he took the bamboo hat from Sarutobi, the crowd boiled over. They celebrated crazily, and the cheerful sounds even covered up some sharp and terrible screams. Sudden changes always happen when people least expect it, silently, but suddenly. Chapter 204, Who Will Win? The sky was about to dawn, but not yet bright. The mists, still undispelled by the morning light, swirled and coiled, forming various shapes in the invisible places, a perfect reflection of the anxiety that filled Shinayu's heart. Most human fears stem from the unknown, but there is one enemy whose identity, even known, still easily inspires fear, because its very existence is a legend that exists in the unknown. Uchiha Madara. If it weren't for the existence of Senju Hashirama, the meaning of this name would be even richer. But even now, this power absolutely exceeds the general definition of powerful. Although Shinayu knew from the beginning that he would be the ninja world's greatest enemy, it was only when the game truly began that the immense pressure revealed its true power, an oppression even more terrifying than facing the allied shinobi army head-on. Do you really think you can keep an eye on me by relying on that guy who can use wood release? Shinayu didn't look back. Standing in the northwest corner of the village, the place farthest from the Hokage's face, Shinayu stopped fearlessly and demanded aggressively. Indeed, no matter how he wavered in fear before, Senju Shinayu would never hesitate when facing his enemy. Oh? So you've been noticing Zetsu for a long time. A woman's figure gradually became clear amidst the trees. Clearly, just as Shinayu had predicted, the woman named Uchiha Airi was none other than Madara's proxy. Was she indeed the lost Uchiha of that time? There was no way to obtain a Bido, but Madara had finally found a suitable agent. Perhaps this was fate. Before dawn, the sky finally plunged into its deepest darkness. You are too arrogant. Zetsu, possessing the same wood release ability, was at most a mere imitation of Madara's. Compared to the true Senju, his so-called wood release was nothing but insignificant, and in Konoha, in Shinayu's territory, his only notable concealment and surveillance abilities became childish tricks, utterly threatening. Interesting insight. Yu covered her mouth with her hand and smiled softly. That enchanting smile betrayed no trace of fear of the legendary wood release technique. Instead, it was filled with a certainty of victory. I'm really growing fond of you. Too bad, I don't like flirtatious women. Ruthless. Having already decided to rip the relationship apart, Jinai naturally wouldn't mind taking advantage of her verbally. He paused. Especially those smart Alex. Oh, Yu's smile grew even more seductive, but her eyes darkened with murderous intent. Are you really that sure? The unfamiliar voice began to transform, and like her face, everything that once belonged to that stranger began an unbelievable transformation before Jinai eyes, transforming into someone he knew all too well. Now, she stretched out her voice, yet it retained her usual tone. Are you still sure? Jinai clenched his fists. Although he had already guessed that the woman's willingness to undertake such a spy-like operation must have backing, what was unfolding still exceeded his expectations. He had miscalculated. If it were now, would you understand what I'm saying? The woman who stepped before Shinayu with delicate lotus steps was no longer the enigmatic Uchiha Airi. That face that was all too familiar to Shinayu, its owner was called Uchiha. It seems you already know quite a bit. Standing opposite Shinayu with a cold and indifferent face, Uchiha spoke calmly. What do you mean? Shinayu gritted his teeth, suppressing his rage. How much do you know about Uchiha Madara, huh? Are you referring to the undead who died in the Valley of the End, or that old immortal hiding in some corner? Silence lingered for a moment, the inky black of the sky deepening. You are very smart, at least compared to Hashirama Senju. You know how to guard against hidden enemies, and you also know how to root them out. Eagle shook his head, but you haven't done well enough. As for Uchiha Madara, you still underestimated your opponent. The plan started a long time ago, and before, I did leave some loopholes. You were too soft-hearted, Shukaku. Yes, Eagle nodded, although it is indeed possible to control the tailed beasts with the power of the eyes, I was too hasty at that time. I failed, but then, a smile appeared on the corner of Eagle's mouth. But unfortunately, just as I expected, you couldn't make up your mind even after collecting this information through the root. Now, do you really have the confidence to overthrow Konoha? Shinayong's voice was terribly low. Minato will be the fourth Hokage soon. What good will it do you to show up at this time? Fourth Hokage. Eagle's tone was full of ridiculous sarcasm. No, there will never be a fourth Hokage again soon. You actually guessed one thing right. Irie is indeed Madara's man, and his purpose in coming to Konoha is, of course, for Minato. What's the matter? So, you have given up? Eagle shook his head in disappointment. You are just this much? Are you done? The morning light tore open the sky, and the dazzling light dispelled all the shadows in an instant. Hiss! With a relentless wood-release thrust, the sharp wooden splinter pierced through the eagle's body unhindered. You're right, you did leave a flaw in Shukaku, but you're wrong about one thing. Shinayu smiled confidently, then unhesitatingly yanked the splinter out. A torrent of blood spurted out. You left too many flaws, Uchiha. P.S. Second update. Throwing myself on the floor, I'm begging for everything. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 205, Mirror Flowers and Water Moon. Shinayu smiled confidently, then unleashed the wooden splinter without hesitation. A torrent of blood spurted out. Those enchanting drops of blood splattered across Shinayu's cheeks, further inflicting a sinister, bloodthirsty aura on him, already under the influence of the demonic spirit. Stop hiding. Do you think a mere wood-release clone can fool me? Completely ignoring the corpse lying at his feet, Shinayu vigilantly surveyed his surroundings. Yes, he'd known all along that this was Uchiha Irie's plan. Perhaps from the day he'd traveled through time, he'd developed a special sensitivity to the Uchiha surname. Not to mention the mysterious Uchiha who had returned to the village at this crucial moment. According to the analysis report received from Shukaku's Jinchuriki, it was Shinayu's wife, Uchiha, who had attempted to hypnotize Shukaku during the battle. On the surface, whether it was the power of the Sharingan or the ambitions of his family, Uchiha did have a motive for his actions, the premise being that people were missing a crucial piece of information. Uchiha wasn't the only one in this world to have awakened the main Gekyo Sharingan. Somewhere, in the deep darkness, a remnant of a past era silently watched everything unfold with those terrifying eyes. Ultimately, even the images extracted from Shukaku's mind weren't entirely reliable. With sufficiently powerful eyes, even memory modification could be easily accomplished. This seemingly clever deception gave Shinayu a vague clue from that moment on. Besides Obritaro, Uchiha Madara had found a new agent. Under these circumstances, when Uchiha Irie appeared, he immediately became the primary suspect. Furthermore, misusing Nagato's power was Uchiha Irie's second mistake. Perhaps even she hadn't anticipated that Uzumaki Nagato wouldn't become the crucial pawn they'd anticipated, or perhaps, rather, that he was far more capable than they'd imagined. Judging from the ruins of the Rain Country, Yohiko and his three companions Akatsuki organization must have engaged in a fierce conflict with the Three Kingdoms coalition. Ultimately, judging by the situation on Flatop Mountain, the Three Kingdoms naturally emerged victorious. However, Yohiko didn't die in that conflict. Instead, he, along with Konan and Nagato, bravely survived. The key point lies in the obviously inappropriate words spoken by Tendo Pain. After all, the weak who sacrifice their own lives will never be favored by fate. This was Shinayu's final advice to Yohiko. In other words, if Tendo was truly controlled by Nagato, there's no reason for him to say such words at that time. While theoretically, Yohiko couldn't possibly be capable of wielding the power of the Six Paths, even with such a bold assumption, the previous lack of coordination between Tendo and the other five paths provides the best explanation. So, the question arises. If Nagato had been co-opted by Madara, then why would they deliberately launch such a pointless test after already sending spies into Konoha? Indeed, that level of attack wasn't even enough to constitute a deterrent. Having witnessed Shinayu single-handedly repel the coalition forces, Madara, or rather, his agent, couldn't fail to understand that the current Uzumaki Nagato was no match for Shinayu. So, what was Pine's purpose in being sent here? Could he, unable to even probe Shinayu's limits, have come here simply to harass him? No, of course not. All of this was explained when Irie, with his main Gekyo open, arrived on the battlefield. But in a way, this was Shinayu's only miscalculation. It seems I underestimated you. In the shadows of the house, Irie's figure gradually became clearer, but this time, Shinayu no longer had the urge to attack. Not just one. More and more Irie appeared out of thin air in this small world. This was undoubtedly a genjutsu, and only a genjutsu could explain it. But, solution. Disrupting the flow of chakra within one's body was the most effective way to dispel a genjutsu, but the world in Shinayu's vision remained unchanged. There was undoubtedly only one possible way to achieve this. This ability, indeed, the Orioles between heaven and earth spoke simultaneously, charming smiles on their faces. Each Mangekyo Sharingan has its own unique ability, and mine is called Mirror Flower and Water Moon. The ultimate hypnotic eye? No, ultimately, it should only be within the realm of illusion, and as for being unable to dispel it, I see, it can be modified multiple times within a certain range, the terrifying power of the Mangekyo Sharingan. Regardless of whether the victim can dispel the illusion, as long as they remain within the Mangekyo's gaze, or within a certain range of the caster, they will be subjected to the illusion countless times. If this is the case, even if the illusion is dispelled in an instant, it will naturally become meaningless. So, how will you deal with this situation? P.S. Don't think that we've already started solving puzzles here. This is only a small part. P.S. 2. Please give me everything. Has anyone reached 1,000 votes today? Chapter 206, Counterattack in the Dark. So, how will you deal with this situation? Indeed, fighting without being able to dispel the opponent's illusion is undoubtedly a very dangerous choice. Kyoka Sujetsu, an ninjutsu that essentially controls the senses within a certain range, is truly a headache. Without being able to determine the opponent's position, Shinayu is completely unable to counterattack. Or is he relying too much on the information in the original novel? He assumed the opponent's trump cards were Wood Release and the Rinnegan, but he didn't expect Madara to have found such a skilled agent. The Mangekyo Sharingan has been mastered to its fullest extent by Irie. With its unlimited control over human senses, she can easily infiltrate any fortress and manipulate her enemies at will. On the other hand, there's some good news for Shinayu. While the power of the other Mangekyo remains unknown, judging by the current stalemate, it's unlikely to be a strong offensive ability. While Shinayu's Wood Release form offers exceptional offensive and defensive power, forcing a fight under such circumstances would be extremely difficult. However, given the current stalemate, simply escaping the situation is no easy task. His five senses, even his perception, was completely controlled. Shinayu had no way of tracking down his enemy, no way of even confirming that he was retreating in the right direction, or perhaps he had simply fallen into a trap. Puff, puff, puff. A series of explosions and flames ignited Shinayu's body, as if it were a punishment sent down from heaven. Without any warning, crack, the wooden body instantly split apart, and all the scars and flames were also extinguished. Can it only be detected when the attack takes effect? In this situation, Shinayu had no chance of competing with her. Rather, it would be extremely dangerous to engage her before finding a way to resolve her extremely troublesome illusion ability. However, if Shinayu really wanted to leave, it was not impossible, although he certainly didn't want to do so unless it was absolutely necessary. Wood Release, Tree World arrives. Inside Konoha, towering trees appeared out of thin air, stretching endlessly, but this incredibly wide-ranging attack wasn't aimed at Uchiha Irie. Without a target, such an attack would be ineffective. With the insight provided by the Mangekyo, such a haphazard attack was a joke. Of course, Shinayu's goal wasn't always this. On the day the Ondame took over, Shinayu chose to confront him at the furthest point from the inauguration ceremony. Besides being concerned about the possibility of harming innocents, wasn't it also to ensure he could act freely? The trees frantically broke through the ground, struggling to reach further out. A miraculous power manifested once again. The virgin forest, suddenly appearing, instantly occupied a third of the village, and stretched ever further outward, appearing within sight in a split second. And this spectacular spectacle wasn't created for combat. Wood Release, Mayfly Jutsu. Before the next wave of attacks arrived, Shinayu was completely trapped in the vast jungle, and no trace of his presence could be found. Senju Shinayu fled. He escaped. Zetsu finally revealed himself from the trees. Having witnessed the entire duel, he knew everything clearly. There's nothing we can do about it. After all, he was a ninja capable of using Wood Release. If he could be wiped out so easily, it would be surprising. Yu still smiled and shook her head. From beginning to end, she stood not far from Shinayu, not moving a step. But, in the end, she won this duel. Looking at everything around her destroyed by Wood Release, compared to this, the small amount of damage caused by pain that day was nothing. Go and scatter the bodies of those killed with Wood Release around. Illusions are illusions after all. No matter how real they seem, There will be a day when they will be exposed. But this does not mean that illusions are meaningless. Human beings are creatures that can naturally get the results they want as long as they are given a little bit of insignificant inducement. From today on, Senju Shinayu, the wood release user feared by the ninja world, will officially become a traitor to Konoha. In this case, in the current Konoha, the only ones who can stand up to the standard are Minato and the old Sandame Sarutobi. Such combat power alone cannot cause any obstacles to Yu's plan. On the contrary, if Shinayu takes any other action, the whole of Konoha will become his enemy. Isn't this interesting? Who will be the winner in the duel between the twins of Konoha? It's extremely rude to describe another country like that. With his eyelids lowered, Moroku stood there calmly, as if he'd known Shinayu would be here all along. Well, mind reading is really too troublesome. Anyway, the distance seems to have gotten longer lately, hasn't it? Sorry, I might have to bother you a little longer this time. Shinayu scratched his head sheepishly. While this was a worst-case scenario, fortunately, now out of Uchiha Iri's sight, he finally had a chance to strike back. Only when the opponent feels they're about to win do they reveal their fatal weakness. Iri wasn't the only one who understood this. Tisk, 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 tisk. Shinayu-kun is truly blessed. You find a confidant wherever you go. The sound, like sandpaper rubbing against each other, echoed again. That pale, terrifying man with snake-like eyes had no chance of appearing here. Because of the sudden battle in Konoha village, almost everyone believed he had defected. In fact, he had indeed defected, but the way most people thought was subtly different. Just as all of Orochimaru's previous experiments were overseen by the Root, this defection, too, was all part of Shinayu's plan. To counter those eyes that seemed to see everything in the darkness, Shinayu needed a force independent of Konoha, a force independent of their intelligence network that seemed to encompass the entire ninja world. Continuing our research here will lead to our own death, Shinayu had said to Orochimaru that day, and the meaning was as literal as it could be. Orochimaru could no longer conduct experiments within Konoha, whether it was Minato's appointment or the current situation in the ninja world that demanded his departure. He needed to relocate his laboratory. Chapter 207, Jealousy. The huge power gap between ninjas and ordinary people is self-evident, but in fact, even ninjas with powerful abilities are as vulnerable as ordinary people at certain times. For example, when pregnant, Xianyang had obviously made all the preparations before taking action. Sometimes, he often thought that if he had made more preparations at that time, White Fang's sacrifice would not have been in vain. This time, he certainly would not make the same mistake again. According to the original storyline, both Madara and Uchiha Iri were likely targeting the tailed beasts, and their reason for targeting Konoha could only be the 9 tails within Kushina. However, no one could guarantee that without Shinayu's protection, the expectant mother, Wasi, would be in danger if she remained in Konoha. Shinayu had originally entrusted his friend Minato with this matter, but Minato's words had awakened him. Indeed, no one in this world could protect Wasi better than himself. So, early that morning, before all this unfolded, Wasi had been secretly escorted out of the village by Shinayu, but her destination wasn't the Demon Kingdom's headquarters, which was plotting a counterattack. Shinayu didn't want Wasi disturbed before the birth of her child, so he entrusted 2 people to take her to the most unexpected location. It was still barely dawn. After 2 days of traveling, though Wasi, still young and pregnant, hadn't experienced any physical discomfort, the 2 accompanying her remained at her side, treading cautiously on thin ice. "Madam, we're almost there." After a brief rest, Yuian, now even more handsome, carefully placed the dry rations warmed by the adventure fire before Jiu. He knelt respectfully, just like the child he had been so many years ago. Yes, aside from that brief unpleasant encounter at the city wall, Jiu was generally satisfied with Jinayang's trusted confidant. After all, compared to Jinayang, she was truly of noble birth. Although she hadn't enjoyed such elaborate rituals and offerings during her childhood, she had certainly been influenced by them. From a young age, the little boy had completely become Jinayang's shadow, helping him deal with difficult matters and offering advantageous strategies when necessary. In other times, he never overstepped his bounds, as if he didn't exist. Of course, most importantly, he was completely loyal to Jinayang. Meanwhile, in the dense forest farther away, several figures were vaguely visible approaching. Enemies? Please do not panic, Uchiha-sama. It was only after he spoke that the man with the warm smile appeared from behind Uchiha. Although also serving as a guard, This man was undoubtedly a complete stranger to Uchiha. If it were Shinayu, perhaps he would be considered familiar. Amiyoshi Yoichi, the Fire Nation's ambush agent in Konoha and their most secretive informant. They are ninjas from the Daimyo Prefecture. I have already sent a communication last night. They are here to pick us up, he saluted respectfully. The territory of the Daimyo Prefecture is ahead. Please rest assured, Your Majesty. Yes, Yoichi stood beneath the throne. As Ritsuko's confidant, his duty required him to present himself to Ritsuko upon Eagle's arrival in the Fire Nation and report all recent developments. Also, I received news yesterday that Senju Shinayu has temporarily defected and left Konoha. Yes, Ritsuko sipped her tea. Her movement still as graceful and charming as that day, and the slight smile that curled her lips further demonstrated the magnanimity and depth of a ruler. She seemed unfazed by the man's defection. The Queen of the Fire Nation still remembers that meeting vividly. Besides the immense benefits it brought her, the man himself, Senju Shinayu, held a profound interest in her. Ritsuko had met many gamblers over the past 20 years, some crazy, some treacherous, but none dared to bet on a weak woman like her. Call it the constraints of their ideals, call it driven by desire, but in reality, Shinayu was the first to support her. Mystery was Ritsuko's biggest impression of this man. So, what kind of woman could make this man, who was unmoved by her own beauty, fall in love with her? Ritsuko smiled bitterly and shook her head. Was she jealous? Chapter 208, Alliance. Shinayu, residing deep within the Oni Kingdom's Shrine Maiden's palace, suddenly sneezed loudly. Normally, a ninja of whose caliber should be completely immune to even the most common colds. Of course, in this critical moment, Shinayu had no time to dwell on what exactly was going on. Hopefully, who is doing well in the Fire Kingdom's daimyo's residence. Getting back to the point. To the Shrine Maidens, Shinayu, having helped the Oni Kingdom overcome its demonic predicament, was undoubtedly their benefactor, and Moroku generally granted them all of their requests. Apparently, temporarily renting a side hall wasn't a problem for the Shrine Maiden, who owned the entire castle. And right now, two men from Konoha sat facing each other within the palace. Are you satisfied with the facilities I have arranged for you? With the power of the demon country, completely replicating, even the experimental facilities in Konoha wouldn't be a problem at all. After all, the difference between major powers isn't financial resources, but rather elite talent. This is why, in the original story, a scientific genius like Orochimaru, despite being a renegade ninja, still received support from the land country and founded the Sound Village. Putting that aside, Shinayu's meeting with Orochimaru at this time certainly wasn't just to discuss such trivial matters. While using such semi-coercion to force someone to leave their village and accompany someone with great ambitions to leave their homeland, and then claiming it was to strengthen their relationship, it certainly seemed strange, but that was indeed Shinayu's intention. As previously mentioned, to counter those eyes that seemed to see everything in the darkness, Shinayu needed a separate force independent of Konoha, and if he truly wanted to support this force, he couldn't do it alone. Shinayu had no intention of leaving Konoha for too long. On the other hand, Konoha wouldn't allow him to wander around without a route mark. He would either be apprehended or killed on the spot. Therefore, he needed more than one ally, an absolutely reliable one. Tisk-tisk, Orochimaru continued with a sinister smile, his long, slender tongue bracing his lips. You make it sound so easy, Shinayu-kun. I've left behind quite a few precious test samples. I've already prepared for this. The Senju family's blood bank will be open to you, and the Land of Fire will also be providing covert assistance. Oh, his sharp, snake-like pupils suddenly narrowed. I never expected Shinayu-kun to have such deep connections even with the daimyo. Shinayu sneered. No need to test the waters. Fujiwara Ritsuko's succession is indeed connected to me. Until now, the relationship between Shinayu and Orochimaru had been limited to a transactional one. Once this fragile chain of interests was broken, their partnership would naturally come to an end, much like the previous Yondaime election. But now, it's different. For Shinayu, Orochimaru's ultimate interests no longer conflict with his own. Even if you were to establish the Sound Village as in the original story, I believe that as long as Lengjun still has a shred of sanity, he wouldn't launch any Konoha collapse plan. Therefore, as a reliable ally and partner, informing him about Ritsuko's situation beforehand is beneficial and harmless. Enough of this boring chatter. Time is running out, so I'll get straight to the point. Shinayu pondered for a moment, even his posture becoming more serious. Lord Orochimaru, I believe our partnership can be taken a step further. In the coming period, I will do my utmost to support your research. Of course, I also hope that you will lend a hand when necessary. This time, it was Orochimaru's turn to remain silent. Alliance with Shinai was indeed a good choice. In fact, if the election of the Fourth Hokage hadn't occurred, Shinai and his partnership would have continued quite happily for quite some time. Now, through the extreme measure of defection, the conflict between the two has been averted. Logically, continuing to cooperate with the former would maximize their benefits. However, the series of events surrounding his defection has alerted Viper. Using his defection as an opportunity to hide in the shadows, thus reversing the previous situation of the enemy in the dark and us in the light, is indeed a sound strategy. However, for Senju Shinayu, who has always relied on absolute power to crush all, choosing such a strategy actually means compromising with his enemies. Leaving the village is certainly not without its dangers. Besides the constant threat of capture, the village power that Shinayu has painstakingly cultivated over the years is likely to face significant changes. Even if Shinayu can reclaim this position, he, once branded a traitor, will likely be forced to remain hidden in the darkness, just like Danzo once was. All of this suggests one thing: Senju Shinayu, and perhaps all of Konoha, is facing a powerful enemy lurking in the shadows. That ruthless hand even forced the wood release user, who was known as the second most powerful immortal, to temporarily avoid its edge. The problem lies here. If he chooses to become an ally with Shinayu at this time, it means that Orochimaru himself may have to face this terrible enemy. For scientists, this is a very troublesome matter. Shinayu Kunlungjun's voice became even lower. Before sharing the benefits, shouldn't you let me know what kind of enemy we are going to share? P.S. I ask for everything. Recommendation tickets, rewards, etc. The unknown existence said while eating caviar sushi and rolling around. Chapter 209, The First Target. Before we share the benefits, shouldn't you let me know what kind of enemy we're sharing? Although I'd guessed it long ago, how could someone as perceptive as Orochimaru not have noticed this? It seems the previous sugar-coated bullets had completely failed. But whatever, the truth will inevitably be revealed. Since it's bound to be discovered sooner or later, it's better to be prepared in advance. I can tell you who he is, but whether you believe it or not is beyond my control. Shinayu shook his head helplessly. Go ahead. For scientists, the more bizarre something is, the more fatally appealing it is to them. Curiosity certainly isn't the only thing that has killed cats. According to the historical records of the Senju clan, and the investigations of the root over the years, in the Battle of the Valley of the End, the first-generation Senju Hashirama did indeed win, but Uchiha Madara didn't die as the legend said. Shinayu's voice grew deeper as he spoke. According to reliable information, this undead spirit that roamed the ancient times is actually just hiding deep underground, silently licking its wounds, waiting for the perfect opportunity for revenge. Can you believe what I'm saying? Honestly, I don't want to believe it. The venomous snake spit out its tongue, and the expression on his face became solemn for the first time. But a moment later, Orochimaru actually showed an excited smile again. But it's interesting. If Madara is really still alive, he should be a half-dead old man now, but if his power has not declined, or even improved a step, Orochimaru became more and more excited as he continued to reason. If that's the case, that means that during the final battle, Madara finally found the way to eternal life. Everyone has something they pursue. For Shinayu, he wants to protect everything he wants to protect, even at the cost of destroying the entire world. And for Orochimaru, nothing can attract his attention more than eternal life. Before him, there were actually predecessors who obtained the secret of eternal life. So we have to seek, we have to get closer to what this so-called truth looks like. Tisk, I admit I'm indeed attracted. But, Shinayu-kun, your sincerity isn't limited to this, is it? Although Madara's appearance had allowed Orochimaru to find another path to immortality, for someone who had already developed the reincarnation technique, such news couldn't fully impress him. After all, the benefits and risks on this path were completely disproportionate. Of course, by this point, Shinayu was already 70% to 80% confident. After all, if Orochimaru truly had no intention of joining the plan, he probably wouldn't have asked so many times. Negotiations were never something politicians feared. In fact, they often focused on how to bring the conflicting interests of both parties to the table. While Shinayu wasn't a competent politician, and Orochimaru wasn't someone whose interests needed to be pursued, the same principle applied here. As an ally, I have a piece of advice for you. Oh, Orochimaru clearly didn't underestimate this young man. From a long time ago, Orochimaru considered this man to be as powerful as himself. I'd like to hear more about it. Remember I once asked you for some information on the reincarnation technique? Yes, Orochimaru nodded. At that time, this technique, which was related to the secret of Orochimaru's immortality, was not yet fully completed. So even when it was forcibly taken away by Shinayu, Orochimaru paid little attention to it. After all, he had since undergone several revisions and research, and the current reincarnation technique was far superior to the incomplete version. But since Shinayu mentioned this technique now, it must not be without purpose. Orochimaru would still be cautious about this technique that was almost as important as his life. What's wrong? Are you also researching the reincarnation jutsu, Shinayu-kun? Unfortunately, one of my techniques draws upon knowledge of the reincarnation jutsu. While the technique isn't yet complete, I've discovered something during my experiments, he drawled, as if deliberately trying to whet Orochimaru's appetite. But before that, I'm curious if Orochimaru-sama has conducted any ninjutsu resistance tests on the subjects of the reincarnation jutsu, ninjutsu resistance? As a scientist, meticulousness is essential. Orochimaru would never rashly use this technique on himself without hundreds of tests. After all, it's a forbidden ninjutsu involving the soul and life, and no one could take such a risk. He's not just testing the reflexes and sensitivity of the 5 basic ninjutsu, wind, fire, water, earth, and lightning. He's even experimented with various rare bloodline limits. Judging from the feedback so far, there shouldn't be any problems. No, wait. Could it be? That's right, Lord Orochimaru. From the other person's expression, Xianyang roughly understood that even someone as smart as Orochimaru had already understood this truth. After being devoured and reincarnated many times, the resistance to illusions will drop to a terrifying level. Well, now, I think we can talk about cooperation. P.S. Second update, keep asking for everything. Chapter 210, The Power of Science. In the original novel, Orochimaru, the primary boss early in the story, harbors an almost obsessive desire for the Sharingan. To this end, he even keeps Sasuke, a man destined for ulterior motives, by his side, all for the sole purpose of seizing the Sharingan, which holds immense power. Even the strongest possess their own identity and boundaries. Could Orochimaru, having completed his soft transformation and mastered thousands of forbidden ninjutsu, truly simply desire the potential power boost the Sharingan could bring? Setting aside the question of whether anyone other than the Uchiha clan could truly unleash the Sharingan to its full potential, and even if reincarnation techniques could overcome most rejection issues, was it truly in Orochimaru's best interest to expend so much time and energy, abandoning his current path, to pursue such an uncertain power? Of course not. But since Orochimaru chose this course of action, he certainly had his reasons. In a sense, what Orochimaru needed wasn't perfectly powerful destructive power at all. What he truly desired was the powerful and perfect resistance to illusions afforded by the Sharingan. With the exception of Iari's Kyoku Sujetsu and Washi's Tsukuyomi, Shinayu was virtually immune to common illusions, not only because he could instantly switch between yin-yang and yin-yang release, but more importantly, due to his training since childhood, Shinayu possessed a mental strength far superior to that of ordinary humans. To put it more simply, his soul was far more stable and powerful than that of an average person. Conversely, if uninterrupted, Orochimaru would have continuously replaced his reincarnations over the next few years, seeking ever greater power. However, in this process, as his soul and body repeatedly merged and separated, his soul gradually weakened. This weakening of his mental strength ultimately led to a sharp decrease in his body's resistance to illusions. Such an incomplete Orochimaru stood no chance against Uchiha Itachi, who also possessed Tsukuyomi. Ultimately, without a way to address the damage to the soul, the reincarnation technique is merely an incomplete one. In the original novel, Orochimaru simply ignored the after effects, assuming they only became apparent after multiple reincarnations, ultimately leading to his inherent weakness. Fortunately, this time, Shinayu had the foresight to spot the problem. Well, now, I think we can discuss cooperation, Shinayu said confidently. My plan is going smoothly, but there's something else bothering me. He quickly recovered from his recent predicament. For Orochimaru, failure and setbacks are simply part of the scientist's life. Even if things weren't irreversible, even if they were, wasn't the purpose of scientists to create impossible miracles? Oh, His hoarse voice returned to normal. I didn't expect that even a genius like Shinayu would have troubles. No, regardless of whether geniuses truly have no troubles, if we're honest, you, Lord Orochimaru, are the true genius. This wasn't just a compliment. Those who are half a step ahead of the world are geniuses, while those who are one step ahead are madmen. Madmen are always misunderstood by the world. Orochimaru is undoubtedly such a madman, full of miracles. Of course, only a madman could possibly help Shinayu with this kind of thing. I wonder if Orochimaru-sama has heard of Yang Tun energy, although it was a question. Shinayu's tone didn't contain any doubt. As a disciple of the Sandaime, it was not uncommon for him to be exposed to some of the secrets of the ninja world. Shinayu was sure that Orochimaru was no stranger to Yang Tun energy and Yin Tun energy. Sure enough, the latter nodded, but didn't speak. He was gesturing for Shinayu to continue. Then I'll be frank, Shinayu paused, frowning. Unfortunately, due to an accident, I can now produce both energies simultaneously within my body. These two diametrically opposed abilities can indeed bring about tremendous destructive power. However, this destructive power is currently uncontrollable. This time, Shinayu didn't sound more like a command than a negotiation. I hope you can find a way to allow these two energies to coexist. Indeed, after mastering the method for freely converting Yang and Yin energy, a new path opened before Shinayu's eyes. A path not even the six-path sage had attempted, without the power of the materialized Sharingan, relying solely on the most primitive transformations of chakra to maintain the fusion of the two energies within the body. Although Shinayu had made numerous attempts before seeking help from Orochimaru, this kind of scientific research was indeed not suitable for a warrior like him. Research should be left to specialized personnel. Although the Roots Research Department had not been successful, when it comes to the power of science, no one understands it better than Orochimaru. Chapter 211, Konoha Village. Not to mention Shinayu's temporary departure. Within Konoha Village, this sudden and drastic change still caused a terrible shock. Regarding Shinayu Senju's departure, Konoha has yet to officially explain it, and is even mobilizing all its resources to mitigate the impact of this disaster. Without understanding the ins and outs, it is indeed difficult to imagine why Shinayu would do such a thing. What is the need for the head of the root to betray the village? No one knows, but considering the threat, if Shinayu Senju is truly confirmed as a traitor, then this man still holds the lives of all root members in his hands. Until his death, all root members will be affected by the mark. Under these circumstances, the village was forced to take immediate action, temporarily placing all of Konoha's roots under surveillance. Regarding the disaster caused by the wood release technique, Konoha was forced to accelerate its reconstruction efforts while also actively searching for clues to the events of that day. After all, no one actually witnessed Shinayu's departure. The only certainty was that a battle had taken place nearby, and the individual who engaged Shinayu was also formidable. The barrier surrounding Konoha had received no news of the intruder. But this was merely a matter of concern for the higher-ups. For the most ordinary ninja, Senju Shinayu's rampage had indeed destroyed countless buildings. While the casualties were not significant due to the Yondaime's inauguration ceremony, the death toll, including several ninja, would have been significant even in non-wartime times. Moreover, this time, it happened right in front of the people. It could be said that because of this incident, the trust of the always illustrious Senju Shinayu in Konoha has plummeted to a new low, with some even willing to believe that his defection was Shinayu's own idea. After all, even his parents and wife disappeared from the Senju clan's residence after that incident. And because of this incident, the other of Konoha's twins, the newly appointed Fourth Hokage, Namikaze Minato, has gained even more trust and attention. Although Minato has not issued a wanted notice for Shinayu since the incident, he has handled post-disaster reconstruction and casualty compensation with remarkable efficiency, always with a sunny smile. Regarding the higher-ups, his trust in his own judgment while keeping the entire route under surveillance demonstrates that Minato possesses a regent's approach that rivals that of his predecessors, the dividing line between a teacher and a mother for life. Prove it to me. The pressure of chakra was overwhelming, and Obito, who had just stood up, was pressed back to the ground as expected. Minato was a good teacher, at least for his three disciples. On the battlefield, Minato's powerful strength was reassuring, and after the war, Minato's teaching ability and concern for them were also worthy of praise. Kakashi, currently the strongest of the three, had already reached the level of a general Jonin. While inheriting the same body training techniques from White Fang, he had taken a different path from Minato and his father, using lightning release chakra to partially activate cells in his body, completely bypassing the meridians. In this regard, Minato generously accompanied the brat in repeated training, imparting all his knowledge of chakra's properties and form changes. If there was anything that truly made Minato feel guilty, it was probably White Fang's death. After all, both Shinayu and Minato's safe escape was predicated on White Fang's self-sacrifice. As for Rin, she displayed formidable talent in chakra control and medical ninjutsu, and after the war, Minato used his connections to send her into the Senju clan. Perhaps no one knew this today, but as Shinayu's close friend, Minato, who had grown up in the Senju clan, knew very well. This once declining Konoha clan possessed a legacy that ordinary people could hardly imagine. Finally, there was Obito. A descendant of the Uchiha clan, he had originally been criticized for his delayed opening of the Sharingan, but Minato recognized his talent. On this point, Shinayu completely agreed, and with their help, Obito was given the opportunity to train under the current head of the Uchiha clan, Uchiha Washi. It was during that time that Washi's ever-stern face etched itself into young Obito's heart, more like a mother than a teacher. That's right, the one who looked at him coldly every day, occasionally bestowing upon him a deadly genjutsu. Though Obito never noticed any of these, she healed all the injuries sustained from daily training at night, even the mental scars healed with the precious medicinal herbs she provided daily. So, Obito had no reason to hate Washi. Although Obito always put on a dismissive expression whenever he saw her, that was just childish awkwardness. Prove it to me. Washi's words from their first meeting remained etched in Obito's heart, becoming his driving force. One day I'll prove it to you. I'm your proudest disciple. So, of the three little ones, it was Obito, with his Uchiha blood, who absolutely didn't believe Senju Shinayu had truly defected from Konoha. It was Obito, with his Uchiha blood, because Washi had gone with him. It's that simple. P.S. First update. It's the weekend, so please tip me. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 212, each shows his magical power. The night wind howled. Atop Konoha Yanayan, a woman stood silently, her gaze captivating, yet profound. You watched everything silently. In this land called Konoha Village, she arguably stood even higher than even Namikaze Minato, the Hokage. It seems those closest to Senju Shinayu have been transferred ahead of time. Now, both the root and the Senju are just skeletons. Behind her, Zetsu, still resembling a plant, yet more like a human, slowly emerged. The darkness made his form unclear, but judging by his tone, he was likely not the somewhat stiff white Zetsu. As expected, Yu's lips remained raised, seemingly unfazed by the incident. He can actually avoid all the perception of wood release. The one who approaches him is the real Senju, isn't he? Irie smiled. No matter it's you or Madara. How can simple imitation surpass the original? As if any of them can truly understand the Sharingan, are you just going to let him escape into the dark? The fighting power displayed by Senju Shinayu has completely exceeded the standard that Nagato can limit now. Of course, being in the dark has its advantages. All actions are away from people's eyes and ears, which means they will never be exposed to the sun. Irie's smile became even wider. I never expected Nagato to be able to restrain that monster. Don't you think that being able to get him to leave Konoha is already our victory? Ignoring Zetsu's silence, this woman is better at using conspiracy than Uchiha Madara. Coupled with her ability, Irie is an enemy that no one wants to face. After all, for me, as long as I can appear in front of everyone openly, it is actually a victory. Is this the only thing you can do? No. The scarlet kaleidoscope began to rotate. There is simply no one in the world who is worthy of my all-out effort. Mirror flowers and water moons. Since awakening the pupil technique residing in his left eye, Yu has not encountered an opponent that can cheer him up for a long time. But in fact, the ability that the kaleidoscope gives to its users is not limited to this one. The dividing line for placing the pieces, the morning light shines. The sun opens the broad and dark embrace of the horizon as usual, embracing the entire lush forest, shining on the sparkling sea in the distance. The strategy that has been decided long ago. Cooperation and so on, of course, are not spoken casually. Xianyang has already made a complete plan, since he has decided to hand over the research to Uncle Snake. It means that Zenyaong will take care of all other aspects. The purpose of the Oni Kingdom's laboratories is more like a treasure trove and a database, for scientists, more materials, more actual testing sites, more workspaces, certainly not right under the nose of the laissez-faire shrine maiden. At this point, Zenyaong couldn't help but look back at Snake with disdain. You deserve to be poor forever. Even though Zenyaong generously gave him the privilege of selecting human test subjects from among the prisoners of war, you still occasionally go out to ask for money. Come on, this kind of thing is really embarrassing, okay? And when Zenyaong asked about it, the venomous Snake replied with a straight face. Because the experiment didn't go well that day, we quickly ran out of materials, and it was too troublesome to go find Zenyaong. It was too troublesome. Snake, are you just like a nerd? But think about it. Aren't scientists supposed to be able to bury themselves in the lab for days or even months without even venting? So, they and ordinary geeks actually have the same goal, different paths. So, flying around the Pentagon, at best, can be chalked up to happy geekery. PFFT. His imagination was running wild again. Zenyaong shook his head vigorously. Was he tired from the long night's march? Yeah, that must be it. Anyway, to prevent Orochimaru from going to the Miko for help, Zenyaong had no choice but to conduct his and Orochimaru's next experiments in another country. Luckily, Zenyaong had more than just Orochimaru heading to the land of demons and the eagle sent to the daimyo prefecture. Masahiro-kun, this place seems to be very close to the land of fire, right? Orochimaru frowned. No matter how cautious he was against an opponent like Uchiha Madara, he couldn't be too careful. But he was so careless as to come so close to Konoha. Yes, this time the target is the underground laboratory that once belonged to the Root. Apart from the development department that I have already eliminated, only a few people know about it, but if that's the case, Orochimaru certainly knew something about the situation inside Konoha through Masahiro. Under such circumstances, he still easily used the Root's facilities. As the former head of the Root. That's really too risky, Masahiro said this in a tone of blame, and then chuckled. No matter who it is, they would think so, right? Do the opposite? But, looking at the still worried look on Orochimaru's face, Masahiro had no choice but to use his trump card. And we have the strongest support within Konoha right now, you mean? Yes, Zenyaong said with a mischievous smile, enjoying the feeling of being one step ahead. Why do you think the entire Root was isolated and imprisoned immediately after I left? Indeed, this is the mysterious laboratory known only to a handful of Root members. And with everyone in the Root imprisoned and isolated, who could possibly find it now? Master Zenyaong, at the door leading to the underground laboratory, Tishao knelt quietly, awaiting Zenyaong's arrival. Of course, the three Root squad leaders, including Wuking and Huming, had just happened to be away from the village on missions before Zenyaong's defection. After a smug glance at Snake, Zenyaong's gaze turned toward Konoha. He had said this many years ago, humans only fail when they think they are on the verge of success. Uchiha Irie, are you ready for your own defeat? Chapter 213, Women's Conversation. Please, Ritsuko's voice remained as divine as a goddess. Intelligent people are always careful with their words, because anyone who talks too much is considered pretentious, loses their composure, and falls short. If it were just a gentleman's conversation, perhaps such scrutiny wouldn't apply. This world, after all, is based on reality, and a momentary exchange of words will have no effect. Jiu understood this principle, and Ritsuko understood it even more. But for beautiful women, especially when two beauties meet, that innate attraction to each other is almost inevitable. Beauty needs no further explanation, it is the greatest contradiction between the two. And when this entanglement is woven by the same man, the contradiction is infinitely magnified. Jiu remained silent, but it wasn't an evasive silence. She raised her chin, and from across the tea table, she suddenly gazed down at the queen before her. Before this, the two might have heard of each other, but they had never met. One was the head of the Uchiha clan, the other the first female daimyo of the Land of Fire. Their exceptional qualities inspired admiration upon their first encounter, but in the next moment, that admiration turned to inexplicable hostility. According to etiquette, the host yields to the guest. The goddess was unconcerned, her lips still unopened, yet a smile permeated her. The tea is bitter, the spring water astringent, it cannot possibly be considered refined. Her delicate hands gently stirred, and as the brown tea flowed, its rich aroma filled the entire building. Though it was clearly a peerless tea, Ritsuko calmly grasped the teacup and took a sip. There was only one. She seemed unconcerned, yet she remained silent. According to etiquette, the guest should follow the host's wishes. The female warrior goddess, her phoenix eyes slightly closed, her expression dignified. One knows only the bitterness and sweetness of life, there's no need for judgment. With a decisive move, the purple clay teapot's lid was lifted, and steam, accompanied by a refreshing aroma, wafted everywhere. It was fine tea, but for a moment, the breeze passed, and the tea was already cold. A handwritten note is unashamed, so why fear the frost on the moon? Ritsuko shook her head. If a woman acts assertively, she will be deprived of a man's love. Eagle opened his eyes and gazed calmly at him. Those who only know how to be gentle are vases, good only for display and play. The silence lasted only a moment. I'm curious, how could a woman like you fall in love with him? Just like I'm curious, why would you ask such a question when you know nothing? Ritsuko smiled, warm and natural, yet with a sense of superiority. Did it start with that time he single-handedly rescued you? For the daimyo of the Land of Fire, it was easy enough to learn about the ninja wars. Moreover, the battle that crushed the Land of Winds was quite famous. It started with what he whispered to me, Wise answered without hesitation, the smile on her lips growing even sweeter. No matter how many years passed, she would never forget that stubborn, adorable boy, and herself, foolishly clinging to his back. I think I understand why he's not interested in me anymore. Their eyes met for the first time, a fleeting glint of light, though no one saw it. You're truly a possessive woman. The smile remained, but this time it held a chill. I've never been his match, Wise sneered. And I never intended to change anything. The atmosphere stagnated, even the air seemed to lose its clamor, becoming unusually quiet. How long do you plan to stay here this time? As if the conversation was with someone completely different from the one before her, Ritsuko's words carried a hint of masterly warmth, and she gently placed her hand on Wise's. Wait for him to pick me up, or wait for another woman to come find me. Oh, this time, Ritsuko was genuinely interested. She was no stranger to the woman Eagle had mentioned. They hadn't met each other yet either, but judging by the intelligence Yoichi had brought back, she was a formidable figure with ruthless tactics. Uchiha Iori, that was the owner of that name, forcing Senju Mahiro to temporarily leave his home base. Regardless of the outcome, the fact that he had done this was truly admirable. Have you known her for a long time? Rather, we've been rivals since childhood. Eagle shook his head helplessly. For her, all her memories of Iori were wrapped up in the pain she most hated to recall, that torment, that hatred and resentment she didn't know where it came from, but from the moment they discovered her, the two had been more like black and white than water and fire, day and night. At least, in Eagle's memory, aside from that one time, they had never truly clashed again. It hadn't been like that until today. But since then, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they had never stood on the same side for a single moment. Perhaps, it wasn't hatred. It was something far beyond that. P.S. Third update la 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 la, please recommend, please reward, please do anything. Chapter 214, The First Enemy. For a clan as vast as the Uchiha, the birth of one or two new lives was nothing new. It simply meant one more member enjoying the glory of the clan, one more person who should sacrifice their lives for the Uchiha clan. Moreover, that fragile, young life came from a branch clan. That's right. In terms of parentage alone, Washi was definitely far inferior to the likes of Itachi or Sasuke. Even the branch clan members of her own age couldn't compare. Washi's mother wasn't a distinguished ninja, or rather, she was simply an ordinary person with some ninja education. For years, the family had been silently supported by her father, a jonin, but unfortunately, Washi never met him. When her mother was still pregnant, Eagle's father died in battle during a mission. It was said that he died there while trying to protect the main family's ninjas from retreating. He died in that unknown place. So from a very young age, the not very sensible Eagle had an instinctive aversion to the main family. He even had this aversion towards the Uchiha. But she was also a strong child. She hardly ever complained about herself like others. In order to fill her stomach, she didn't have the leisure time. She worked hard to survive, like the green grass growing in the cracks of the rocks, relying on the little sunlight that others disdained and a trickle of water flowing in the shadows, growing up alone, painfully, but confidently. And all of this had the first chance to change that year, the dividing line where fate binds us. Young Waka couldn't fathom whether her father's death was linked to the internal conflicts of interest within the clan. But she knew that if he weren't known as the first of the branch clan, he wouldn't have been sent to the most dangerous battlefields to protect the so-called hope of the Uchiha. Therefore, she must have lived a low-key and ordinary life for all those years. After all the pain and struggle, Waka didn't blame fate for its injustice. This obvious fact had been cruelly etched in her young mind. For Waka, she only needed to think about one thing: how to make life better for herself and her mother. The conclusion she reached was even simpler: if only she could become one of the privileged class, to become the hope of the Uchiha. And at that moment, Waka had a path laid out before her. The Uchiha, who revered the strong, held an annual examination for those who hadn't yet entered the ninja academy. Those who excelled in the examination would be noticed by the elders, rising to the top and enjoying the clan's finest resources. They were truly the chosen ones. And this year, when Jiu turned 5, the time had finally arrived. Unexpectedly, the coward who had always avoided competition actually signed up for this year's annual exam. But seeing the girl, pale and frail from chronic food scarcity, few believed she had any hope. Ordinary people are still ordinary people. They can never defeat those gifted geniuses with immense innate advantages. Living in their shadow, becoming necessary cannon fodder until they mature, is their duty. The annual exam was about to begin, and Jiu, standing alongside several outstanding children from the main family, hadn't noticed the despised little girl, completely devoid of clothing, the same age as her, who would soon become her lifelong rival. Meanwhile, Jiu, completely focused on proving himself, had no time to spare for a certain unhappy girl, also beneath the same sky. Fate, sometimes, is so unpredictable, impossible to predict, and even impossible to change. The only thing that's certain is that the fate of Uchiha Usagi and Uchiha Iri began that very day. From that day on, long afterward, until a battlefield unimaginable, the entire bond between these two stems from this seemingly insignificant annual exam. Begin. P.S. Fourth update. Apparently, it's not just the rewards, even the recommendations haven't increased much? So sad. Chapter 215, Showdown. Annual exams, begin. There was no need to dwell on it. For Uchiha, there was no escape route from the start. This was why she would rather endure a life unbearable for ordinary people than wait patiently for the perfect opportunity. She couldn't afford to fail, because failure would mean her eternal damnation. She couldn't expect to enter this competition with a purely game-like mindset like those born with privilege. For Uchiha, this competition meant the rest of her life. She clenched her fists, then relaxed them again, letting out a long breath. Standing among the adults, she felt completely out of place. Even without looking, she could sense the gazes cast upon her: disdain, contempt, even a hint of hatred. There was no trace of affection. But she didn't care. She hadn't told her mother about the reference, knowing that her gentle, ordinary, and submissive mother would never approve of such a thing. Yes, she wouldn't understand Uchiha's feelings. Forgive my willfulness this time. If I have to live my life in such a humble way, I'd rather just bloom brilliantly this once. The first match, Uchiha Jiu versus Uchiha Iri, the dividing line of the fateful duel. She came from a group of young boys and girls who were also from the main family. They were of similar age, but exuded a true aristocratic temperament everywhere. It was hard to believe that her opponent, the girl with patches all over her body, was a family member with the same surname as her. It was even more difficult to imagine that such a branch family member who had hardly received any formal ninja training would be the opponent of Iri, who was known as the genius of the main family. She was so delicate, even Jiu knew it. Judging solely by her foundation and physical fitness, she couldn't compare to the well-heeled Zong family, not to mention that even within the Zong family, Jiu was a rare talent. Of course, this wasn't to say Jiu had no chance of winning. She could win. In fact, if winning were the only consideration, Jiu would have participated in this annual exam at this time last year, but she didn't, because simply winning wasn't enough. Winning the annual exam didn't prove anything. In reality, it was merely a stage. It allowed the talented to showcase their talents, allowing each elder present to identify one or two who would carry the hope of the future among the competing children. Real combat, beyond physical strength, also relied on combat experience and on-the-spot adaptability to determine victory or defeat. Therefore, this duel wasn't about victory or defeat, but rather the talent displayed during the clash. As for combat experience, that could be learned, cultivated, and nurtured. For the elders, it was completely irrelevant. Tsubasa understood this all too well. Life's harshness had taught her to think early on. Before other children had even shed their childish trappings, she was already able to view everything with relative rationality. Therefore, she had chosen to take the annual exam this year, the last year she could take the exam. This also meant that Tsubasa was confident enough to fully demonstrate her talent. She could win, and it would be a crushing victory. The two stepped forward, facing each other silently. Uchiha Tsubasa, Uchiha Irie, childish voices echoed, and the girls on either side finally launched their attacks. Their tiny bodies simply couldn't hold much chakra, and besides, with Tsubasa's appearance, there was no need for her to use ninjutsu to achieve victory. Geniuses who live in the spotlight, born to enjoy a lifetime of glory that others never enjoy, are destined to see only their own brilliance, and this, too, could be their biggest source of defeat. Punch. Her tendons and body were undoubtedly nourished by chakra, and the main family, having been rigorously trained since childhood, naturally displayed extraordinary power. Her right fist, thrust out with less than full force, held the potential for a change of tactics at any moment. The other fist, tucked back in her center, was capable of both attack and defense, displaying the demeanor of a master. The elders observing the fight nodded. This child, Uchiha, was indeed exceptional, but her opponent, a mere branch family member, offered no sign of further development. Would this battle be over quickly? Indeed, as everyone had predicted, the first round of the annual exams would soon conclude, but unfortunately, the gamblers had chosen their bets. A thin, weak right hand slowly extended, its slightly curled palm weak and slow. It didn't even properly block Yu's punch. Was that an easy victory for you? No, it was far from that simple. The snake-like arm traced a semicircle from the outside, completely encircling Yu's arm before suddenly exerting force at the elbow. The once powerful punch suddenly lost its force, and the pain that followed it made the main family's genius lose his composure. Advance. A lunge step charge. At this moment, Wuji's movements were unwavering. A close-range punch deflected the opponent's backhanded fist, and the subsequent shoulder-carrying strike caused the young Wuji to lose his balance. And in the end, all that awaited Wuji was a mediocre knee strike to the stomach. Bang! A dull thud echoed, and a moment of silence fell over the entire arena of the annual exam. Not only was Wuji, a branch family, able to defeat the main family's genius, but even more astonishing was the sight of a Magatama resting quietly in the little girl's eyes under the scorching sun. Undoubtedly, that was the pride of the Uchiha, the Sharingan. A mere 5-year-old had already mastered such a dojutsu. This was truly genius. All eyes were fixed on Ji, and from that day on, Ji's life trajectory began to change. No one noticed a child, still slumped in the dirt, her gaze glazed over, the one they had just seen as a promising member of the clan. Naturally, no one noticed the flash of despair, confusion, pain, and deep resentment in her eyes. From that moment on, the chains of fate bound the two together, though neither of them noticed. Chapter 216, Top Secret Mission. The past always brings endless sadness, and the complex entanglement between Iori and Washi cannot be fully explained in a few words. But now, the shadow hanging over Konoha is real and unshakable. Whether it is Iori, who has taken the lead, or Shinayu, who hides in the darkness, each is preparing for the final victory. As the fourth Hokage, how could Minato Namikaze remain indifferent? Although he does not have a greater intelligence advantage than Iori, who has Madara's support, or Shinayu, who has foresight, and has been at a disadvantage since the beginning of the secret war, this does not mean that the youngest Hokage in history can only sit and wait for death. In the words of Jiraiya, compared to the fourth Hokage, everyone else pales in comparison. He possesses the most ninja qualities ever, mastering ninjutsu and possessing a clear mind. Minato's eminence as the fourth Hokage was certainly not solely due to his impressive military achievements and immense personal strength. In fact, he also excelled in his ability to understand people and manage their plans. In some ways, he was a more definitive ninja than the third Hokage. This was evident in his leaving the power of the Nine Tails to Naruto, allowing him to confront an unknown and formidable enemy. Before his departure, Shinayu didn't reveal much to Minato due to the white Zetsu, but this very fact provided Minato with the greatest clue. Why would Shinayu, who had always been as close as a brother and shared everything, not even consult with him before making such a decision? This very absurdity was Shinayu's greatest clue to Minato. Especially after Shinayu's departure, Minato grew even more vigilant. There might be someone within the village capable of widespread surveillance. This was precisely why Shinayu couldn't directly confide in him, instead offering only fragmented statements. Regarding the report, he was definitely at the enemy's mercy. However, if leveraged effectively, this could prove fatal. Very good, everyone's here. Since becoming Hokage, Minato hadn't directly given any orders to his 3 disciples for a long time due to official duties. Of the 3, Kakashi, the most gifted, had already become a Jonin, while Rin had already demonstrated abilities far beyond her peers in medical ninjutsu. Finally, Obito, who initially struggled, had experienced a surge in power after receiving instruction from Waki. Even now, with his triple Magatama Sharingan, he could rival Kakashi, but when it came to dealing with ordinary Jonin, Obito was no match for him. Minato-sensei, why did you call us all here today, idiot? You should call me Fourth Hokage now. Having lost his father, Kakashi had become even more distant, but thanks to Minato's constant care, he was still able to interact normally, though the result showed a certain harshness that didn't belong to a child. Well, it doesn't matter. Just stick to the old ways. Minato was exceptionally tolerant of his students, his signature smile temporarily defusing the conflict. But soon, his expression turned serious. Actually, I asked you to come here today because, as your teacher, I have a secret mission for you. Secret mission? Though their ninja ways and futures differed, the words struck a chord with all of them. As a ninja from Konoha village, even if they didn't study hard at the ninja academy, there were certain things that the teacher would force them to remember. One of which was the grading of ninja missions. A confidential mission issued by the Hokage himself meant that the level of this mission would be at least A level. Although they had just experienced the baptism of war, letting these 3 kids complete it. So, the specific content of the mission, Kakashi, who was the first among the 3 to be promoted to Jonin, naturally took on the role of captain temporarily. Well, everything is recorded in this ninjutsu scroll, Minato instructed again. Destroy it as soon as you have finished reading it. Yes, final advice, Minato added before the 3 of them left. For ninjas, there is usually no need to understand the meaning of the mission. All we have to do is obey and execute. But sometimes, if you learn to think, then you can truly complete your mission, the dividing line for executing the mission. Seeing Obito's impatient look, Rin could only stay aside helplessly and let him calm down as much as possible. Apart from that, there was really nothing else to say. After all, the so-called confidential mission was to go to the 4th training ground to set up traps for training. It was really outrageous. Moreover, looking back, the traps including the hanging ropes and the ground sinkholes were too dense. Just to make the ropes, they had to go to the resources department and extract the special sealing scrolls. Among the 3, only Kakashi, who was most familiar with Minato, fell into deep thought about the current mission. The most important thing was the last part that Minato said, which made no sense no matter how you thought about it. P.S. Moxie, this is the 6th update, please give me a reward. Chapter 217, Pregnant. After that incident, Kakashi and his team had carried out similar secret missions numerous times, even during the time when Kakashi and Obito were transferred to the Hokage's direct Anbu. While these weren't necessarily traps, similar incidents had the 3 of them traipsing through nearly the entire village. Well, they certainly complained during this time, but as Minato's disciples, their frustrations were tempered by something more gratifying. After a long summer, time finally arrived in September. Autumn was approaching, and the weather was gradually turning cooler, as usual. But for Konoha, the change in weather was far less significant. That's right. If you calculate the time, the 4th Hokage's wife, Uzumaki Kushina-sama, should be about to give birth. As the village Kage, the prospect of becoming a father was naturally a cause for excitement for the entire village. This meant that a new generation of Konoha was being nurtured, and one day, they would shoulder the same responsibilities as their fathers. Perhaps because they'd been away from the village for so long, no one in Konoha cared about the fact that another hero, Senju Shinayu's wife, Wasi, was about to give birth in the Fire Country daimyo's mansion, becoming a true mother. After all, they still carried the unconfirmed defection label. As those little lives approached this world, their parents were deeply concerned. Whether it was the usually lively and fiery Chili Pepper or the usually stoic Wasi, both were now resting in peace, awaiting the arrival of their newborns. Meanwhile, Minato and Shinayu, their fathers, were pursuing a more complex and dangerous plan. During this time, Konoha was remarkably quiet. It seemed as if even the regular patrols and surveillance by surrounding forces had been staggered, leaving Konoha completely immersed in a tranquility. This unexpected peace, however, only put Minato under immense pressure. It was as if an invisible hand separated Konoha from the approaching danger. Yet, the danger still existed, even brewing. Those threats that were so huge that made people tremble, seemed to be waiting for the most appropriate opportunity, and then swallow Konoha in one gulp. Although he didn't want to say it, Minato had to admit that this feeling of being completely confused was really terrible. It reminded him of the situation when he and Shinai were on the battlefield performing missions behind enemy lines. There was no backup at all, and although he looked around, although the scenery was repetitive and monotonous, it seemed that terrible murderous intentions were hidden everywhere. Sitting in the Hokage's office, Minato's eyes cast into the distance. He was not sure of the exact location, but for him, every time he encountered such a helpless situation, there was always someone who would appear by his side. No matter if he was surrounded or if it was complicated ninjutsu, as long as he was there, the problem would always be solved. Shinai, where are you? Compared to Minato, who lives in a world of crisis and sunshine, Shinai's recent life is more in line with his definition of chief of the root organization. That's right, for nearly 10 months. Except for occasional trips to the land of demons, he has spent most of his time in his own underground laboratory. Here, Shinai and Snake have spent sleepless nights. Damn it. What's with that expression on your face? I'm serious, I'm doing an experiment. How do you feel this time? Orochimaru's unique hoarse voice sounded again, and in the darkness in front of him, the shirtless Shinai slowly walked out from the enclosure of various instruments. His situation was a little strange, or it should be said that compared to a few months ago, Shinai has become more out of the scope of human beings. Of course, this does not refer to the terrible energy in his body or the like. After all, those would not understand if they were not in a head-on battle, but now. If Shinai walked out like this, he would probably be arrested as a new species immediately. The conflict of energy is still very obvious, but it is always within the tolerable range. He raised his claws. That's right, Shinai's whole body is now covered with a thin layer of scales. In addition to the obvious claws on his palms, he also has two conspicuous horns on his forehead. Of course, no matter which monster in the legend is missing, at his waist, a long tail is also dragged behind. Speed up, time is almost up, tisk tisk. There is certainly no problem with the experiment. Orochimaru licked his lips habitually, but Shinai-kun, your speculation, and the technique you provided, can it really work? Oh, this time, it was Shinai's turn to smile playfully. He curled up his tail. When did Lord Orochimaru actually start to completely believe in the power of others? Huh. This is called trust. Then trust is good. P.S. The 7th update. There's only a little reward. I'm really unhappy, so unhappy, rolling on the ground. Chapter 218, Action begins. Finally, the time has come. Sitting in the Uchiha residence, though most people watched, Irie had quietly sipped tea for nearly a year. Who knew if all this was just a mirage? The mediocre had no time to speculate, while the self-righteous pursued everything that seemed like she was simply orchestrating a show. In Konoha, Irie had already achieved absolute dominance through her own abilities. Any ounce of the village's strength was at her disposal should she so choose. But if Konoha was the only one in the village, how could she possibly realize her plans? This was just the beginning. Starting from the most powerful Konoha, and before the rest of the ninja world could react, bit by bit, she secured all the tailed beasts. Compared to Madara's crude and direct methods, Irie had her own way, noble, elegant, and seamless. Have you figured out where Kushina gave birth? Irie asked, unfazed, even though she was alone in the empty room. Konoha seems quite prepared, a deep voice murmured faintly from the wall, or perhaps even beneath the dirt. There are 2 locations we can't confirm yet. The outcome should be clear in due time. Is that so? Irie chuckled and shook his head. Did Namikaze Minato sense something? This truly was a desperate struggle. At this point, no matter what they did, it was too late. Even without further push, Konoha had already lost any chance of victory simply because of her eye technique. Then when the action begins, you go to deal with that side. Is there a problem? No. Ju's voice sounded again. As for clones, you can have as many as you want, but for that guy, her ability is very troublesome. Huh. What resistance can a woman have when giving birth? Yu's eyes were full of disdain. Although it's a pity that I can't solve it myself, this is enough. Let's act according to the plan. After this, Konoha will have no value to exist. Then Senju Shinayu, leave him to me, understood? The final prepared dividing line. Is it under control, still in the cold and damp underground laboratory? Orochimaru kept fiddling with several documents in his hand, as if hesitating about something, but when the person in front of him appeared, he put on his signature cold smile again. It had nothing to do with friendliness or sinisterness. For Orochimaru, this was already his richest expression. Just barely. This is enough. Shinayong moved his shoulders. Compared to the monstrous posture last time, this time, his appearance was at least back to normal. For nearly a year, in order to solve the problem of alien energy in the body, and also to deal with Uchiha, Shinayong chose this emergency plan that was more like a portable house to increase his chances of winning. Of course, a real way to solve the problem once and for all has already been found, but considering the time, Shinayong still chose another one. After all, it's just a temporary measure, as long as it can maintain stability. He moved his palms easily. At least a few months ago, he had experienced the pleasure of being worse than death. Tisk tisk, then, now is the time to talk about the enemy, right? Orochimaru was also satisfied with the results of the experiment. With the help of Shinayong, an excellent experimental subject, he discovered many interesting things. Of course, these can be discussed later. After all, at the moment, what could be more important than dealing with the enemy in front of him? After a short silence, Shinayong sorted out his thoughts, and then slowly spoke. There are probably 3 foreseeable enemies. In addition to Pain and Zetsu, who I mentioned to you before, that woman's ability is even more difficult. Uchiha, the snake's pupils suddenly tightened. For Orochimaru, the 2 opponents who possessed the Sage's Eye and would release had already learned in detail from Shinayong, and compared with these incredible abilities, since Shinayong would say that the woman's ability was even more troublesome. There is no doubt that this guy must be extremely difficult to deal with. Mirror flowers and water moons, Shinayong began to explain. Within the range of the ability's influence, it will have an unlimited impact on the enemy's senses. Simply put, in the process of fighting with this woman, you will be equivalent to being in an illusion all the time. However, for Lord Orochimaru, you have an innate advantage. Although Orochimaru has not yet reincarnated according to Shinayu's advice, his resistance to illusions is only average. Even Shinayu is not sure he can break through the illusion, so what advantage does Orochimaru have? The conditions for activation. Shinayu's voice is firm and confident. You have the biggest limitation of that technique. PS one more shot. That's all for today, and the climax will officially begin tomorrow. Well, after this plot is over, this volume will also end here. The content of the next volume will be related to Shinayu's child. Haha, by the way, continue to ask for rewards. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 219, Pre-War Analysis. Kyoka Sujetsu. For a ninja, this technique is almost instantly lethal. Like Flying Thunder God, this jutsu lacks direct lethality, but in a sense, it's the most powerful supporting ninjutsu. Minato, utilizing his unique melee combat system, supplemented by the Flying Thunder God jutsu, ultimately earned the reputation of Golden Flash in the ninja world. But what about you? What exactly is the terrifying power of Kyoka Sujetsu? To understand this, we must first discuss the mechanism of this jutsu. Simply speaking, this jutsu bears some uncanny similarities to Uchiha Shisukedo Matsukami. Put another way, these 2 jutsu offer different interpretations of the concept of the strongest illusion. Shisukedo Matsukami can permanently alter a person's mind, undetectable to outsiders. Simply put, it's an irreversible hypnosis. Once the jutsu is established, the victim loses all hope of escaping it, hence Kido Matsukami's reputation as an unavoidable, absolute illusion. Compared to Kido Matsukami, Kyoka Sujetsu's ability might not be as coercive, but its effects are even more bizarre. To be specific, when you cast Kyoka Sujetsu, it leaves a seed within the victim. This invisible, intangible substance, neither chakra nor spiritual energy, is completely unnoticed by the victim. However, if this technique only lasts up to this point, it's completely harmless to the victim. The key lies in Yu's subsequent manipulation. Based on Shinayu's repeated experiments and speculations during his battles, even if the Tree World Descent can't actually attack the opponent, It should, to a certain extent, block visual contact between the caster and the target. Therefore, after casting the tree world descend, Shinai once attempted to disrupt his own chakra again, attempting to break through the illusion. Naturally, he failed. In other words, unlike other Uchiha illusions, Kyoku Sujetsu doesn't even require eye contact between the caster and the target for it to work. This is fatal. Because there's no way to tell when you're being hit, in other words, you can't tell when you're under a Jinjutsu. In a ninja duel, this is incredibly terrifying. It means the opponent could potentially stab you in the heart without you even realizing it. So, is Kagome Sujetsu's ability truly unstoppable? No, of course not. Even ninjutsu like Izanami carries its own risks, and Iari's is no exception. First, the method of operation. True, Kagome Sujetsu doesn't require eye contact to work, meaning that conventional countermeasures against Uchiha attacks wouldn't be very effective against Iari. Furthermore, this type of Jinjutsu can only affect a certain area, or even a group. But ninjutsu must have its own method of operation. True. Kagome Sujetsu's Jinjutsu's range of influence is limited to a circle centered on itself. Once outside this area, once the opponent's Jinjutsu is broken, sensory manipulation becomes impossible. This is the key to Shinai's successful escape. Secondly, Kyoku Sujetsu is, after all, merely a heightened illusion. Even within a Jinjutsu, the subject can still use their abilities, especially for a ninja like Shinai, whose jutsu rarely requires hand seals, whose actual abilities aren't significantly restricted. Conversely, while the physical entities created by ninjutsu can't be used to search for the enemy, they can be used as a basis for reality, at least at the moment the jutsu creates the physical entity. It's completely certain that it exists. To put it more clearly, Kyoku Sujetsu's sensory control doesn't originate with the subject, but with the caster themselves. In other words, senses that the caster can't understand cannot be simulated. And this last point is, in some ways, Kyoku Sujetsu's greatest weakness. You possess the greatest limitation of that jutsu. Shinai's voice was confident and resolute. For a ninja, the ability to analyze a situation is essential, and this doesn't just refer to quick analysis during battle. Seemingly unrelated matters can actually reveal the most deadly truth. Pain's attack. Compared to the fleeting encounter with Uchiha Iari, the meaningless battle that preceded Pain's arrival is often overlooked, or at most, people realize they possess such a powerful ally. But for Shinai, who knew the three children well, that duel gave him a vague grasp of a secret about Chihiko's current situation. However, this also caused him to temporarily overlook a crucial point. Even if Chihiko, or Nagato intentionally hinted at it, what was the true significance of that attack to the enemy? Why, having been in Konoha village for so long, didn't Iari choose to strike while Shinai was in seclusion, but instead only when he had already mastered his power? The simplest and most intuitive explanation is this: in the enemy's perception, striking later would give her greater confidence. Why would Shinai, unable to fight freely, pose a lesser threat than one who had already mastered his power? That's right, it can only be because of the illusion. In other words, something happened after that time that made you finally confident that Jinho Shuayu had already influenced Xianai, and even affected many other people. This is the true intention of Pain's attack. If you think about it this way, the truth will naturally be revealed. During that battle, Yu's only abnormal behavior, or the only thing she did was to come to the battlefield to provide support, and she kept her main Jakyo open. Yu's ability has been decrypted, of course, not all of it. How many did you guess correctly? Haha, by the way, I'm still asking for everything. It's the last day of this month. Chapter 220, Acting Separately. Why do this? The reason is simple. A power like Mirror Flower and Water Moon has few limitations beyond the aforementioned points. So, can such a near-perfect jutsu truly be used without restrictions? No, of course not. While the eyes aren't actually involved in its use, before it can be used, Iari needs to perform another process, a seed. That's right, as mentioned before, when Iari casts Mirror Flower and Water Moon, it leaves a seed within the victim. This invisible, intangible substance, neither chakra nor spiritual energy, is completely unnoticed by the victim. While this invisible, intangible seed is a strength for the jutsu itself, meaning that if a target bearing the seed approaches, Iari can instantly manipulate it. However, in actual combat, this presents a significant problem. A ninja's fate is decided in a split second, so planting the seed before using Mirror Flower and Water Moon becomes a crucial flaw. Simply put, In order to truly use the infinite illusion to attack, Iori must first make the opponent look directly into his eyes, thus planting the seeds of using the mirror flower and water moon. If it were an ordinary day, walking around the village with a pair of Mangekyo open would definitely arouse everyone's suspicion, right? But if it were on the battlefield, to stay vigilant and open his Mangekyo, there would be no problem. So on the other hand, you who left the village before that probably won't be affected by the jutsu yet, I see, or Orochimaru habitually licked his lips with his tongue. If that's the case, then the jutsu that Shinayon taught him would indeed play the greatest role. I never thought that the Uzumaki clan would inherit such an aggressive ninjutsu. Tisk, it seems that this Uchiha Iori is simply a perfect research subject, incredibly powerful illusions, even the ultimate illusion. Such a mouth-watering ability, for Orochimaru, who just learned the weakness of the reincarnation jutsu, how could he not be tempted? If you do catch me, then you can do as you please. From this angle, watching Orochimaru's inexplicable excitement, his long tongue constantly swishing across his cheek, his palms unconsciously stretched out, as if constantly needing something. Shinayon slapped himself hard across the face. Even though we were the only two of us in this lab, couldn't he still maintain a bit of personal appearance? He was one of the legendary three ninjas, wasn't he the cold-hearted Orochimaru? No wonder those brats will automatically define you as the big boss when they see your appearance in the future. Tisk Shinayon-kun, you really have no sympathy for women. It's a deal, then let's act. It shouldn't be a problem if you go and make the arrangements first. He paused, then stretched his body well, although it was true that he made this agreement with Uncle Snake, but generally speaking, Shinayon still thought that it was more likely that he would encounter a second battle on his side. It's time for me to act too, the dividing line of imminent delivery, October 10th, the 48th year of Konoha. For future generations, this date will likely be a day that will never be forgotten, but in reality, its true significance, hidden within history, is likely unknown to many. This day marks the birth of the next era, and the clash of the most powerful forces of this era. Although they had been instructed to maintain secrecy, even if they felt pain, they must not cry out, but, childbirth, how could they possibly hold it in? Only. Pepper continued to let out bursts of heart-wrenching screams. Even Minato, standing by to maintain the seal, couldn't help but worry. Minato looked a little embarrassed. After all, such a thing was beyond the comprehension of a grown man like him. I've never seen Kushina in this much pain before. Is she really okay? No, the midwife in charge of the birth didn't even look up. What woman doesn't feel pain during childbirth? Rather than that, the more important thing was to prevent the Ninetales from taking advantage of the opportunity to release the seal. You'd better keep a close eye on the seal on the Ninetales, but Minato's expression grew increasingly troubled. If this continues, at a time like this, as a husband, he couldn't help at all. Alright. You're the Fourth Hokage, don't make a fuss, her work never stopped. Intense pain might bring a man down, but a woman is much stronger. Meanwhile, outside the barrier surrounding Konoha village, a mysterious figure in a black robe gracefully approached the barrier. Her right hand clenched a blood-stained kunai, and whenever she passed an enemy guarding the area, the sharp kunai struck their throat without hesitation. Along the way, corpses littered the ground, but those still alive seemed oblivious to the situation. No, it should be said that in their eyes, nothing special had occurred. Puff, finally, the last Anbu fell down in response, and the tightly guarded barrier now appeared before her without reservation. Nine-tailed fox. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth under the mask. I'm coming. P.S. Second update, and one of the most important scenes in the original work is about to begin. Tisk, a little excited, please reward me. Chapter 221, Changes in Daming Prefecture. This is the most heavily guarded place in the land, for here resides the most powerful of the Fire Nation. The Fire Nation, the daimyo's mansion. In the past, no matter how the war unfolded or how chaotic the situation became, this place would remain unmolested by any force. This was the boundary that preserved the ninja order. Anyone who attempted to cross it would be slain by the entire world. Therefore, for everyone, this was an invisible, ironclad law. And the ninja who established this ironclad law was that once living legend, the only ninja with the power to establish it, Hoshirama Senju. The formidable ninja mastering wood release, senjutsu, and sealing techniques. It was he who single-handedly ended the chaotic world and established this ironclad law. This also meant that if an absolute force emerged capable of challenging the entire ninja world, this ironclad law would naturally cease to exist. Rules depend on the strong, and exist to the will of the strong. Is this the place? Everything seemed calm, as if nothing had happened, and nothing would happen. A dark figure stood silently within the heavily guarded daimyo's mansion. She wore a spiraling mask, revealing only two eyes, the very symbol of the Uchiha clan's pride. For any ordinary person, even a ninja, infiltrating here would be practically impossible. How could a nation with a ninja-inspired military be so completely defenseless against them? Not to mention the strained ninja recruited by the daimyo's army, even the mansion itself was designed to withstand ninja attacks. But, just as this impenetrable castle had failed to withstand the surprise attack of Shinayu and Shiruji years before, this castle proved a complete failure for the mightiest warriors at the pinnacle of the shinobi world. Its intricate mechanisms, its densely packed shinobi, to them, it all seemed a joke. Slightly closing his eyes, the mysterious figure's perception instantly spread throughout the castle. Is that it? A faint smile, hidden by his mask, lifted the corners of his mouth, and the dark figure vanished in an instant, the dividing line of the immortal sun. Come on, mistress. With his fists clenched tightly, Yuan could only wait nervously outside the Japanese-style room. As expected, today was the mistress's due date, but since entering the delivery room, the roars that were obviously trying to suppress the pain made Yuan unable to calm down. For him, everything about his master was the responsibility of the subjects to protect. Not to mention, the Lord has entrusted him with such an important responsibility as protecting the mistress. For Yuan, this is both a great honor and a tremendous pressure. The enemy is watching, and no one can guarantee that no one is spying. Yuan can only pray to the heavens, hoping for a safe birth for the young master. So, in a place like this, he spun around. Although he hadn't sensed any enemy approach, Yuan's years of combat experience allowed him to immediately launch a counterattack with a kunai. Nice skills, a female voice rang out with a hint of teasing. Her mask obscured her features, but for Yuan, who had always been by Shinayo's side, the identity of the newcomer was clear to him. Even without his iconic Sharingans, Yuan would never have been mistaken. And for that very reason, he firmly guarded the delivery room, not daring to retreat an inch. To think she'd come here at this hour. But no matter what, this woman's power was too dangerous. She must be stopped from approaching the mistress. Uchiha. In this case, earth escape, digging and excavating. In the land independent of a corner of the castle, the layers of earth were instantly turned up, and in just a blink of an eye, the original delivery room was completely surrounded. Try your best to drive the enemy out of the range of the mistress's delivery. As long as enough time is delayed, there is still a glimmer of hope. And similar to Orochimaru, Shinayo had already informed Yuan of the information about Uchiha. He also did not directly witness Uchiha's main Gekyo. In other words, he has not been planted with a seed yet. In that case, it means that he is also not affected by illusions at the moment. Victory or defeat is only a matter of seconds. Charge. The kunai in his hand stabbed out quickly. If he could use his blood limit. If that is the case, there is still a glimmer of hope. Puff, a low crashing sound was heard. At this moment, an unexpected yet reasonable figure blocked Yuan's path. He threw the kid who was advancing on his own to the side without any grace. Although he was already an elite Chunin, Yuan could not compare with the battle-hardened Orochimaru in terms of ninjutsu use and combat experience. Tisk, it seems my luck is not so good. A long tongue slid across his lips, but soon, Orochimaru showed a delighted expression. But this is a rare item. He approached the other person step by step, looking directly into his eyes without hesitation. Become my collection at ease. P.S. Third update, the battle has begun. Please reward. Chapter 222. Mother's Defense. Wow. A clear cry pierced the night air. This place wasn't within the tightly guarded barrier. That's right, Konoha's fourth training ground, also known as the Forest of Death. Minato Namikaze, the Fourth Hokage, had, without informing anyone, orchestrated the day's greatest deception. Thanks to a series of warnings he'd left behind, Minato had long since received a signal that the enemy was approaching. The nine-tailed seal would weaken during the Jinchuriki's birth, and coupled with the eerie silence surrounding Konoha village. After Kushina confirmed the start of her labor, or more precisely, after everyone had entered the barrier, Minato activated a jutsu he'd previously deployed within it. the flying thunder god jutsu. With the seal he'd left behind as a backup, this time, Minato directly shifted the entire barrier through time and space. It's born, Biwako held a child, barely the size of her arm, in her arms, symbolizing the hope of Konoha's next generation. Of course, in a way, he was also a child of destiny, entangled in the great fortune of this era. I'm a father, for Minato, no, for any father, this was the happiest moment of his life. He reached out, wanting to gently stroke the child's cheek, but Biwako, holding the child, dodged Minato. What are you doing? As the Sundame's wife, and more importantly, a midwife, Biwako gave Minato a reproachful look. Of course the child should be seen by the mother first. With a bitter face, Minato, completely without any parenting experience, could only watch helplessly as Biwako carried her son to Kushina. Well, it's not that the Fourth Hokage lacked a bit of magnanimity, but it was just a rumor he'd heard from his great mother, Mizuho, that children tend to stick to the side of their parents that touches them first. Ahoha. The thought made even Minato smile softly. For him, great power, the title of Hokage, the name of war hero, none of these truly mattered as much as the safety of Kushina and her child. As long as they were safe and sound, that was all that mattered. So tiny. So adorable, though Kushina was still somewhat frail, having just given birth, she couldn't wait to lean on her child as a mother. Such a fragile, young life, yet for her, it was so hard-earned. It's so good to see you. Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto. No, he should be called Namikaze Naruto now. At this moment, he still didn't know the price his parents had paid for his birth. What a touching scene, an untimely voice suddenly spoke. She wore a threaded mask, her entire body shrouded in a black robe. At her feet, Biwako had long since stopped breathing. But for those present, the most important thing was the swaddling child she held in her arms. Naruto. When the child, who was clearly lying beside Kushina just now, appeared in the hands of the mysterious man in the blink of an eye. I am so moved. I wish I could destroy it all. Well, but for him, it doesn't matter, except for the loss of a precious experimental subject. 3 ninjas. Orochimaru, the female voice was still tinged with doubt, but this time, the newcomer retreated for a moment for the first time. After all, there was no reason for Orochimaru, one of the 3 ninjas, to be here. More importantly, this operation was not prepared to deal with such a powerful force. Trouble. Tisk, what's wrong? Orochimaru approached the other party step by step, with a playful look in his eyes that was not seen before. If it's the real Uchiha, he shouldn't be troubled by a mere person like me, right? He sneered. But there's nothing I can do. Since he's a fake, at least use some of the so-called wood release and let me see it. Shadow Snake Hand. Starting from the arms, several ferocious snakes formed a line, biting and leaping at each other. Just looking at those sharp fangs, it was clear that they were no pushovers. With lightning speed, in the blink of an eye, those fangs tore through the opponent's mask and bit into the jade-like neck fiercely. His breathing undoubtedly stopped, but what happened next left Uin, who fell to the side, dumbfounded. Uchiha-Iri's body began to transform rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into an ugly white monster. White Setsu. P.S. The war is underway, and today's 4th update. Chapter 223, Intensifying. Uchiha-Iri's corpse began a rapid transformation, transforming in the blink of an eye into a hideous white monstrosity. White Zetsu. And that wasn't the end. As the attacking White Zetsu fell, more shadowy figures emerged from the darkness. Their appearances varied, yet they all took on the forms of various Konoha ninjas. True, perhaps Zetsu's transformation technique, which could even mimic chakra, could indeed fool most people. In fact, with no flaws, this imitation was indistinguishable from a clone. After all, while clones created using the cells of the first generation and golems couldn't truly rival the combat capabilities of a senju who truly mastered wood release, clones created this way did have their own unique advantages. Perhaps from the very beginning, Zetsu was considered the perfect candidate for infiltration and intelligence gathering. And to compensate for his significant lack of combat effectiveness, Madara preserved the clone's most fundamental characteristics. Replication. Even if it was superficial, from the outside, the chakra flow, the appearance, even the mannerisms and voice, were identical. This is a flawless copy. Well, for the average person, that's true. Without the ability to sense ill intent, Like Naruto in Nine Tails mode, one would never be able to tell if the other person is a clone or not. But that's just for the average person. As I have said before, scientists are the ones who make the impossible possible. So, for Orochimaru, who has spent the longest time with him over the past year. That's right, that living miracle is Senju Shinayu. He's also the only person in the world who can truly use wood release. This power, once coveted by countless Konoha high-ranking officials and even tested countless times on humans, how could Orochimaru miss it? Even if there were no other purpose, understanding wood release was imperative to fulfilling his promise to Shinayu about his research. Over the course of nearly a year, Orochimaru had not only found a solution to Shinayu's problem, but he had also gained a deeper understanding of wood release. As a power surpassing all other elemental release techniques, wood release's power stems from its ability to create living entities. In other words, whether it's the terrifying tree world descent or the simplest diamond summoning tree, they are essentially living plants. Not only do they not rely on chakra to sustain their existence, but their chakra-absorbing properties actually reduce the user's chakra consumption. Orochimaru had previously conducted experiments and analysis, revealing that when Shinayu uses wood release, most of the energy is actually used to alter the plant's original properties, while simply maintaining the state consumes almost no chakra at all. This may be one of the reasons for wood release's power. Of course, for the current battle, this isn't the main point. A perfect replica, invisible to ordinary humans, possesses a fatal weakness. For Orochimaru, who had already undergone a soft transformation, the guy in front of him not only showed the chakra of the Uchiha clan, but more importantly, it was a real life force that was completely different from that of ordinary people. This life force that was completely beyond the ordinary was like a label on him from the beginning: I am the enemy. This is not my house, and it doesn't seem appropriate for me to appear here. Orochimaru licked his lips habitually, and his hands began to form seals. Let's get rid of you quickly. And the direction he lunged in wasn't where Uchiha Irie was standing. In a flash, a golden flash displayed extraordinary mobility, and the special kunai instantly pierced Kushina's ear, sparking a spray of bright red blood. In the void where nothing existed, a plant-like figure gradually became clearer. Black Zetsu. It was true that the other party had taken Naruto, but their only goal was to take the Nine Tails. Minato, Kushina's voice shone with anxiety. More concerned about the child being held hostage than her own safety. Of course, her worries were unnecessary. Don't worry, a familiar yet cynical voice rang out. The figure, long unseen, struck almost at the same moment Minato launched his attack, swiftly snatching the young Naruto from his grasp. I won't let the baby get hurt. A trace of blood stained Shinayu's face, the wound he had inflicted during their encounter. Chapter 224, The Counterattack begins. A brief silence fell upon the scene. Even for Irie, the situation before him exceeded his initial expectations. True, he wasn't surprised that Shinayu had arrived at the scene at this juncture, but how had Minato been able to sense Black Zetsu's presence at the last moment? No matter how one looked at it, he should have been within the effects of the mirror flower and water moon. Irie's greatest trump card had been revealed long before, but due to its nearly unstoppable power, it had never failed to succeed. Through a single contact with a Mangekyo Sharingan, he planted a mark within the opponent's mind that allowed him to control it. After that, he could activate the ability again, granting unlimited sensory control within a certain range. Just like just now, Minato should have been completely unable to sense Black Zetsu's approach, so why, exactly, had he been able to accurately strike Zetsu with his kunai? Minato, handing Naruto over to the yondaime standing beside him, Shinayu stared intently at Uchiha Irie before him, a predictable, playful smile already tugging at the corners of his mouth. Let's take Kushina and Naruto to safety first, then I'll trouble you here, don't worry. The calm conversation unfolded, like a legendary flash of light that could pierce the sky. Minato nodded silently to Shinayu, then flew away in an instant. Looking at the bewildered iris before him, Shinayu's smile widened. That's right. From beginning to end, Minato hadn't actually seen through the other party's illusions. But as Shinayu had said before, illusions weren't invincible either. As a strength in illusion, it couldn't simulate sensations that couldn't be understood by the caster. Why would Minato abandon the heavily guarded barrier and transfer everyone here? The reason was simple. The secret missions Kakashi and his team had been carrying out were no joke. Minato had already left his own special imprints on the tools and materials given to them. Although he didn't know the enemy's abilities, or even their true identities, for Minato, as long as he had these imprints, he always had the initiative. To maximize this advantage, he even integrated a special seal into the entire delivery room's defensive barrier. In other words, he didn't see Black Zetsu's actions at all, but rather felt everything through the special seal he had previously placed. He tried to destroy Konoha with just a single illusion. Let's be clear, Minato was no unknown idiot. The Fourth Hokage of Konoha village, destined to live in legend. A familiar scene, isn't it? Within the narrow barrier, in the blink of an eye, only the two of them remained, a replay of that day. Shinju's voice held a chill, and before him, Irie finally calmed down. Though the reason was still unknown, at least Namikaze Minato was immune to her illusions to a certain extent, which was definitely not good news. Moreover, right before her lay another problem. I've long expected you to return, but what's the point of you being unable to see beyond the illusion? But no matter how the situation unfolded, if they lost their composure from the start, everything would be over. The superior person needs more than just power and ability. In this situation, he also needs to be calm and adaptable. Shu, Xianyang shrugged playfully and walked straight towards the direction of you. Do you want to give it a try? The dividing line of the snake battle. The jaw seemed to momentarily dislocate, like a truly cold-blooded animal, then suddenly opened to an astonishing degree. No matter how you look at it, this is definitely not something a normal human could achieve. Of course, compared to the spurt spewing from Orochimaru's mouth, that ferocious face would probably pale in comparison. Snakes. For these creatures, inherently cold-blooded yet sleek and powerful, secrecy and darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike a fatal blow, are the norm. But when their species reaches a certain size, when they swarm together like ants, frantically, the sea of snakes, capable of annihilating and devouring their enemies, can also be incredibly terrifying. The shadowy figures approaching also began to panic. In such a terrifying scene, no one could remain calm. However, having been assigned to this mission, White Zetsu certainly wasn't completely without combat skills. Don't underestimate me, the disguise plan had failed. While not adept at direct combat, that didn't mean he lacked the ability. Sporjutsu. The split bodies twisted wildly until they gradually lost their human form. In the blink of an eye, those madly twisted bodies merged into a disgusting white colony. Like monsters without fangs and huge mouths, they also devoured everything that surrounded and blocked them. P.S. Second update, just took a look, and there are no rewards for breaking virginity this week. Also, the slut has made a strong comeback on the weekly recommendation list. Tisk tisk, the chrysanthemum is in danger, but it doesn't matter. We all tasted the taste of chrysanthemum before the nerd left. As for the slut, it should be even more delicious and juicy. Chapter 225, The Secret Hidden Art. Monsters without fangs and maws devoured everything that surrounded them. As expected. Though they didn't inherit true wood release, their degraded form, possessing the ability to multiply and replicate, was not to be underestimated. Even without the ability to summon a massive tree of immense destructive power, even these fungus-like spores were enough to cause immense trouble. The summoned snakes began to be devoured in turn, and any reptiles caught within them were quickly corroded and gradually necrotized. Such a troublesome ability. While its destructive power wasn't directly fatal to humans, once caught, it would surely cause trouble. If that were the case. Earth Release, Earth Flow River. As a disciple of the third demon Sarutobi Hiruzen, how could he not have sought guidance from a ninjutsu master? Orochimaru had already mastered the art of Earth Release to perfection. Against an enemy that relied on terrain for advancement, Earth Release, originally not particularly adept at attacking, had its own strategies. Change the terrain. No, more precisely, destroy it. The ninjutsu was activated. Under the influence of chakra, the power of the ninja was finally fully demonstrated. The once flat ground seemed to have been struck by a mudslide. Whether it was the carefully manicured flowers or the entangled monsters, all seemed insignificant before this catastrophic force. The terrifying torrent of ninjutsu engulfed everything. Only Orochimaru, standing still, at his feet, was the only untouched pure land. This was the terror of the cage level. Ordinary ninjutsu, even mastered by ordinary ninjas, could be transformed into something miraculous in their hands, displaying power far beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. Everything finally came to an end, and Orochimaru smiled as he released his seals. Monsters without direct combat capabilities, no matter how skilled they were at hiding, were destined to be no match for him. Puff. At that moment, a small crack suddenly appeared in the ground. Zetsu, almost completely transformed into a tree, suddenly emerged from the wreckage. He raised his right hand, now a spike, with all his might, and headed straight for the delivery room, which had been protected by Yuan from the beginning. Cut off the fire from under the cauldron. In this tense and suffocating moment, only Orochimaru showed a smile. He said that although he was very unhappy about not capturing Uchiha himself, he could let it go for the sake of this clown with strange wood escape abilities. And if one wanted to catch a lively experiment, what could be more suitable than the hide-and-seek jutsu from Shinayong, the dividing line for the start of the duel? Shinayong shrugged mischievously and walked straight towards Irie. Would you like to give it a try? Bravery is used to praise decisiveness that comes after careful consideration. While it's often confused with recklessness, Senju Shinayu has learned the difference clearly through the intertwining of blood and tears. Before gaining the power to control the world without even thinking, he had already learned to face his own shortcomings and to solve seemingly unsolvable problems with his own strength. Mirror flower, water moon. Even if it were called the most powerful illusion, no one would doubt it. The ability to completely control the enemy's five senses is simply terrifying. Therefore, about a year ago, even Shinayu, who possessed the skills of both Yang and Yin release, chose not to confront the enemy head-on. It wasn't that he would definitely lose if a fight broke out, but simply that he believed Shinayu would find a more appropriate strategy. Without any knowledge of special ninjutsu, he couldn't replicate Minato's actions. But in reality, Senju Shinayu had chosen a more direct solution. Why was he so eager to find Orochimaru then, and once there, why did he demand that he quickly come up with a method for achieving the coexistence of yin and yang chakra? Of course, all of this wasn't just a whim. After all, more than these constructive research projects, Shinayu's most pressing concern was the after effects of devouring the demon's soul. Shinayu had his own reasons for demanding that Orochimaru sacrifice precious research time to develop a method for energy coexistence that was destined to be only effective temporarily. Since he couldn't use special markers to locate the enemy like Minato did, his only option was to address it from a more fundamental perspective. The method for breaking illusions was to disrupt the flow of chakra within his body in an instant. However, with the power of overwhelming power or the unlimited application of mirror flowers and water moons, a single chakra change wouldn't be enough. But what if more than one type of energy existed within him from the start? If that's the case, how effective can the so-called strongest illusion be? Let's wait and see. P.S. Third update. Please give me everything. Recommendations and rewards are welcome. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 226, Dazzling. The minimum requirement for a genjutsu to work is to disrupt the target's chakra to some degree. Compared to his previous analysis of the mirror flower and water moon, what Shinayu is doing now is more profound, more directly striking at the root of the problem. With more than one type of chakra constantly flowing within his body, even the mirror flower and water moon, as long as it's still a genjutsu, would be completely ineffective against Shinayu. So, it begins. Wood release, Sword Mountain Forest. The terrifyingly powerful wood release jutsu finally unleashed its effects. For Shinayu, the ultimate battle with the woman before him had already been decided. Bang! A terrifying crash echoed. The long-established barrier had failed to withstand the expected attack from the horde. Now, for the two fighting within it, it was even more vulnerable. No matter how you look at it, such a barrier could never withstand the terrifying destructive power of wood release. The smoke and dust cleared, and Shinayu, still standing, gazed playfully at the retreating Yu. Her skills were indeed impressive. At such close range, under such extreme circumstances, she'd managed to dodge Kenzenlin's attacks. While it wasn't the most destructive of Shinayu's wood release techniques, considering the sheer range of damage, it was a remarkable skill. She'd evaded them all, even using earth release techniques to create a foothold in the final stages. "He's a guy you can't underestimate," he said, shaking his head helplessly. While the initial attack missed, it was actually the first time the opponent had actively avoided Shinayu's attacks. Just like Uchihayu's confidence in her Kojiki Sujutsu ability, she'd always believed that as long as she could subjugate all her opponents within her Kojiki Sujutsu, victory would be hers. For Shinayu, as long as he could see through the opponent's Kajikasu Jetsu, defeat would be a piece of cake, as long as he could see through them. The back of his neck began to heat up. The burning pain made it impossible to concentrate fully. No matter how terrifying the ninjutsu was, it had its own risks, just as there was no perfect thing in the world. As long as he could still be called a human. Being able to freely wield two completely opposite chakras at the same time like an immortal should not be within the scope of human beings. Scientists are gradually approaching the realm of gods through their research, but that is only temporary. The Curse Seal. Originally a seal that used Jugo's serum to stimulate special natural energy, it now has a completely different effect on Jinayong's body. It separates the yang and yin energy that originally could not exist at the same time, but instead stores them through the medium of the Curse Seal. And in combat, the special energy cycle formed by the Curse Seal can achieve the effect of allowing the two energies to coexist for a short period of time. It must be said that Orochimaru is truly a formidable figure in research, but it's just that this has only lasted a short time. The black Magatama cloud pattern began to spread, starting at the back of Shinayu's neck and, within a few seconds, already spreading towards his face. Just like a normal seal, the spread of the cloud pattern signifies a further increase in the energy drawn from the Curse Seal, which also means Shinayu will possess even greater power, although this was not his original intention. Damn. Has it already begun? Wood release, tree realm arrives. Without further delay, massive trees erupted from the ground. In the blink of an eye, the already lush and verdant fourth training ground was immediately covered by an even more formidable growth. This time, those madly growing trees weren't targeting the countless enemy troops. This time, wood release had a single target. Full power. For the wood release user, this jutsu is merely the opening salvo. The real battle has only just begun. The unique battle terrain created by the arrival of the tree realm is a haven for wood-released ninjas, allowing them to unleash their full potential. From this point on, Shinayu is determined not to give his opponent any chance to counterattack. Die? There was no need to activate any other ninjutsu. The entire forest transformed into Shin's sharpest weapon. As he charged forward, the precarious Uchiha Airi began to find himself in danger. A true crisis. The Kyoku Sujetsu he had always relied on suffered repeated setbacks, and the opponents he faced, whether it was Shinayu or Minato, none of them were easy to defeat. Is this the end? Whether it was Madara's ambition, or her own progress, was it the end? Was it just revenge, desire, or pure pleasure? That's right. Her loosened fists clenched again, and naturally, that pretty face didn't waver for a moment. Such long simmering hatred, such long accumulated persistence, how could it be limited to this? I, too, was underestimated. Purple energy began to emanate from her body, and her already enchanting and strange Mangekyou Sharingan began to spin even more frantically. Wood release, or perhaps something else was temporarily isolated. Just like the Senju possessed wood release, the Uchiha clan, who at that time could rival Hashirama Senju, naturally possessed their own ultimate power. Beyond illusions, the Airi also possessed a more destructive ability suitable for direct battlefield use. The secret of the Mangekyou Sharingan. Susanoo. Chapter 227, Battle of the Strong. Just as the Senju possessed wood release, the Uchiha clan, who at that time could rival Hashirama Senju for supremacy, naturally possessed their own ultimate power. The secret Mangekyou Sharingan. Susanoo. The purple energy solidified. The first part to materialize was the skeleton, from a purely morphological perspective, probably several ribs from the lumbar spine upwards. Above that, a massive skull also came to life. The demon had been unleashed, and the monster let out its first roar. That terrifying roar shook even the earth, and the wood release spikes that had been thrusting at her were blown back by the terrifying blast. After the skeleton fully formed, even more complex changes occurred. Skin, flesh, and soon even the coat and cloak took shape. From a panoramic perspective, from Shinayu's perspective, Airi Susanoo was completely different from Sasuke and Itachi's. Rather, the power of Susanoo was inherently unique to each individual. If that's the case, Uchiha Airi Susanoo looks more like a wandering monk. So, that's quite troublesome. Shinayu, who had originally planned to give it his all, couldn't help but frown. Beyond the form of expression, each Uchiha who awakened the Mangekyou Sharingan and gained its power had a completely different attack style, and these attacks were even affected by acquired possessions. Itachi's Susanoo resembled a samurai, wielding a Yosakami in one hand and a Jutsuken in the other. Sasuke, his younger brother, was a warrior wielding a bow and arrow. As for the legendary Uchiha Madara, he was more like some mythical deity. But at least one thing was certain. Besides the spreading curse seals, the red inscriptions on Shinayu's face, symbolizing sage mode, gradually became clearer. For everyone involved, this war couldn't be dragged out in a protracted battle. Since they had decided to fight to the death here, they couldn't afford to lose. After unleashing the power of Disusunago, the only certainty is that the opponent's strength will be immensely increased. For ordinary ninjas, that would be overwhelming. But if the opponent were Shinayu, this is truly a curse of fate. Shinai finally unfolded the massive scroll he had been carrying on his back onto the ground. Shinai had made numerous preparations for situations like this. Compared to those, this scene before him couldn't help but recall what happened decades ago. The Valley of the End, the most powerful. Wasn't that exactly what happened back then? This is indeed a curse. In that case, I can only defeat you here, just like my predecessors did, the dividing line between taking the first and the last city. Orochimaru's mouth curled up into an excited and even somewhat perverted smile. He was not the only one who had put in a lot of effort to prepare for this action. In order to counter the power of Iori, Shinai also prepared a trump card for Orochimaru, who could not break the Mirror Flower and Water Moon, but had the first mover advantage. The great glory of the Senju clan is often forgotten and overlooked. For Senju Shinai, he not only possesses the blood of the Senju clan, which symbolizes the strongest blood, but he also inherited the legacy of the Uzumaki clan from his mother. Sealing technique, inner elephant control. Just before Zetsu touched the delivery room, no, it would be more accurate to say his fingertips had already touched his ultimate goal. But in that instant, a vast, otherworldly world suddenly appeared before him. Where is this place? He was completely confused as to what was happening. For Zetsu, this kind of experience was a complete first. After all, even among the Uzumaki clan, a sealing technique of this magnitude was a terrifying secret technique passed down only by word of mouth, a legendary art. Haven't you figured it out yet? Orochimaru's voice echoed from all directions. Tisk tisk, as expected, using it on you is a waste. Originally intended to counter Uchiha Iori's Kyokusu Jetsu, a powerful barrier, completely controlled by his own consciousness, would alter the opponent's control over his senses. Of course, there was more to it than that. This massive barrier itself. Chi, the sound of flesh being pierced echoed simultaneously. If it was only this level of force, a fellow who had inherited wood release wouldn't die so easily. Orochimaru speculated maliciously. Li Xiong Yu Yang, this terrifyingly powerful sealing technique, originally possessed a destructive power that could also be called a taboo. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.